Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was halfway through cleaning up dinner when my phone buzzed with a message from a coworker, Mark. He's one of those guys who never texts after hours, so I figured it had to be important. The message just said, "Dude, look at this. This is over your area, right?" There was a video attached. It was taken from someone's backyard, shaky but clear enough. It showed a set of lights, 4 of them, arranged in a rough diamond shape, moving slowly across a dark sky. They weren't blinking like plane lights. They were solid, bright white, almost bluish. The video zoomed in for a second and I realized the background looked familiar. You could see the faint orange glow of the Chevron sign down the road from my neighborhood. I watched the clip twice before going outside. The air was cool, early spring, the kind of quiet suburban night where you can hear every car door and screen door from 3 houses away. My street was still, all the porch lights on, no one outside. I stepped out to the driveway, phone still in my hand. I tilted my head back. They were there. The exact same formation, 4 bright lights in a diamond shape, hovering high above the neighborhood. They looked farther away than in the video, maybe because of where I was standing, but there was no mistaking it. They weren't moving fast, but they weren't completely still either. Every few seconds they'd drift a few degrees one way, but they'd then stop again. The spacing between them never changed. At first, I assumed it was some kind of plane formation, maybe military, but there wasn't any sound. Nothing. Not even the faint hum you'd expect from an aircraft. The air felt heavy, like when a storm's about to roll in, except the sky was perfectly clear, not a cloud in sight. I stood there for a minute or two, just watching. Then I noticed other people starting to come out of their houses. My neighbor, Sarah, stepped out in her robe, holding her phone up like she was filming. Across the street, some guy I didn't know was standing barefoot in his yard, hands on his head. Everyone was looking up. The lights stayed in place. Then, all at once, they shifted. Not apart, not down, but up, like they'd suddenly climbed several hundred feet in a second. It was so smooth it didn't even look like motion, just repositioning. A few people gasped. Sarah whispered something like, "What the hell?" After another moment, the bottom light in the formation broke away. It slid out of position and began moving slowly to the east, away from the others. The remaining 3 adjusted slightly, forming a straight line instead of a diamond. Still no sound. No contrails, no blinking beacons. The light moving east started to fade. It didn't go out completely. It just dimmed, like a lantern being covered by smoke, until it was gone. The rest hovered for maybe another 30 seconds, then one by one, they followed the same pattern, each drifting off in a different direction, disappearing into the distance. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 minutes. When they were gone, everyone just stood there for a while, looking at the empty sky. Someone said, "That was drones," but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. I went back inside, replayed Mark's video, then stepped out again. The sky was dark and quiet. I texted him back, "Yeah, I saw them too. They were right over my street." He didn't respond right away. When he did, he said, "It wasn't just there. My cousin in Thornton saw the same thing. Exact same formation, 10 minutes apart." That made me pause. Thornton was 40 miles away. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those lights hanging over the neighborhood like they were waiting for something. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of messages. Friends sending links to local Facebook groups, grainy videos, people arguing about whether it was satellites or military tests. One guy swore he saw the lights split apart and merge again, but his video just looked like a blur. Around noon, Mark called me. He sounded off, quieter than usual. He said, "Did you check your phone last night? Like your camera roll?" I said no. He told me to look. There was a new video on my phone from around 9:42 p.m. That was roughly when the lights were over my house. The thing is, I hadn't taken any video. I opened it anyway. It was short, maybe 15 seconds. The camera was shaky, pointed at the sky, but I could see the 4 lights in the diamond pattern hovering just above the houses. There was no audio, not even wind or background noise. What threw me off was the angle. It wasn't from where I'd been standing in my driveway. It looked like it was shot from the middle of the street and lower to the ground, almost eye level with my mailbox. I paused the video and scrubbed back to the beginning. For the first second or two before the lights came into focus, I could see the silhouette of my house. The porch light was off. I always leave it on at night. I didn't show that part to Mark. I just told him it must have glitched or something. He said his phone had frozen around the same time, then restarted itself at 9:45. That evening, I noticed something strange. My phone's compass app, the one built into maps, wouldn't work right. The little arrow kept spinning slowly, even when I stood perfectly still. Out of curiosity, I went outside again around the same time as before. The sky was clear, quiet, nothing unusual. But while I was standing there, my neighbor's motion light flicked on for no reason. No animal, no wind. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. No name, just 10 digits. It said, "Look up." I froze. When I finally did look, there was nothing there. Just stars. But for a second, and I can't explain this part, the stars seemed wrong. Like the pattern had changed slightly, or shifted. I tried to line them up with a stargazing app, but it wouldn't load. The text disappeared after a minute, not just from the notification bar, it was gone completely like it had never been received. I didn't tell anyone about that part. The next few nights were quiet, normal, even. But every now and then the sky would flicker. Not lightning, just a faint pulse, like light diffusing through clouds that weren't there. By the fifth night, I was starting to feel ridiculous. I figured it was stress or lack of sleep. Then around 10, I got another video from Mark. This one was shorter, maybe 5 seconds, taken from his backyard. The same formation again, but this time the lights were lower, almost level with the horizon. You could see silhouettes of rooftops against them. He wrote, "They're back." I went outside immediately. The street was quiet, same as before. I looked up. They were there again, same pattern, same silence. But this time, they weren't high above the neighborhood. They were lower, close enough that I could see faint outlines around the light, like something solid was there, blocking part of the stars behind them. I couldn't tell what shape it was. It didn't look like one single thing, more like 4 separate objects holding perfect formation. After maybe a minute, the one closest to me started moving. Not upward this time, but forward, drifting slowly over the street. It passed directly above where I was standing. I expected some kind of sound or vibration, but there was nothing. Just a faint electric pressure in the air like before a storm. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was black. I looked back up. The other 3 lights were gone. The one above me hung there another few seconds, then slid away over the rooftops, shrinking until it blended into the stars. When I got back inside, the power flickered once, just enough to reset the microwave clock. My phone rebooted by itself, and when it came back on, there was a new photo in my gallery, a blurry shot of my street taken from above, like from a drone. My car was in the driveway. I don't know how it got there. The timestamp said 10:03 p.m. That was exactly when the last light passed overhead. I didn't respond to Mark that night. In fact, I turned my phone off for a few days. When I finally powered it back on, his messages were gone. All of them. The photos, the videos, the call history, everything related to that night had been deleted, even the strange clip on my own phone. The only thing that remained was the compass app. It still spins. It was late February when I went camping up near Lake Owen, a few miles south of Laramie. I'd been there once before in the summer, but this was the first time I'd seen it frozen. I went with the idea of getting some quiet. No phone, no work emails, no noise. Just a few days alone in the snow. The first night was fine. Cold, but calm. The kind of stillness you only get in winter, where sound doesn't travel right. I parked my truck near the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the lake, and pitched my small tent close enough to see the ice. The whole lake was covered in a thick, white crust, with darker patches near the center where the snow had blown clear. That night, I built a small fire, cooked some soup, and just sat there staring at the frozen water. Around 10, I turned in. I remember the cold feeling sharp on my face, even inside the tent, but I slept fine. The second night was different. I woke up sometime around 2. At first, I didn't know what had stirred me, maybe a sound or just the wind, but when I opened my eyes, the inside of the tent had this faint bluish glow to it. It was subtle, almost like moonlight reflecting off snow, except it was coming from below, not above. I unzipped the tent halfway and stuck my head out. The air was still, no wind, no falling snow, no sound at all. The glow was coming from the lake. It wasn't bright. It just looked like something dim and pale moving slowly beneath the ice near the shoreline, a few yards from where my tent was set up. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moon behind clouds, but when I looked up, there wasn't any moon that night. The sky was completely dark, stars sharp and still. The light under the ice was definitely moving. It drifted in this slow, deliberate way, following the curve of the shoreline. Not fast, not jerky, just this steady, sliding motion, like it was tracing the edge of the lake. The shape wasn't clear. It wasn't round, not exactly. More like a stretched oval of faint blue-white light, blurred at the edges, maybe the size of a canoe. I sat there watching it for a while, just trying to make sense of it. There were no bubbles, no cracks, no visible reason for anything to be glowing under 3 or 4 inches of ice. The ice was too thick for fish, and I hadn't seen any signs of people on the lake all day. At one point, the light paused, or at least seemed to. It hovered there, maybe 30 feet out, and I swear it looked like it was pulsing, dimming slightly, then brightening again like it was breathing. I put on my boots and coat, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The snow crunched underfoot in that crisp way it does when it's below freezing. My breath fogged instantly. I walked to the edge of the lake, stopping a few feet from the ice. The light froze too. I remember that clearly. The moment I stopped, it stopped. I aimed my flashlight at the ice, and the beam barely reached the faint blur underneath. For a second, I thought I saw something solid down there, like a silhouette. But the glare from the ice made it impossible to tell. Then, slowly, it started to move again, gliding along the shoreline to my left. I followed it with the flashlight, walking parallel to it. Every time I took a few steps, it seemed to match my pace. I stopped again. It stopped. I took one step forward. It flickered, not brighter, but sharper, like it suddenly became aware of me. I turned off the flashlight. The glow under the ice dimmed a little, but didn't disappear. I crouched down near the edge, just staring. The faint pulse continued. The lake was completely still, not a sound anywhere. That's when I heard a noise behind me, a soft, quick crunch of snow, like someone stepping once. I turned fast, heart jumping, but there was nothing. Just my tent, the trees, and the faint orange of the dying fire about 20 yards back. I stood there a while, scanning the tree line, but nothing moved. When I looked back at the ice, the light was gone. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, waiting for it to come back. Eventually, I convinced myself it was something natural, a trick of the light, maybe gas under the ice, or some kind of weird reflection. I went back to the tent, but I couldn't sleep. Every small sound outside made me open my eyes again. I think I drifted off around 4. When I woke up in the morning, there were tracks in the snow. Not clear ones, just faint impressions leading from the tree line toward the lake. They weren't mine, the stride was too long, and they weren't shaped right. They weren't boot prints, more like smooth depressions, slightly elongated, almost like someone had walked barefoot, but with flat, wide feet. They stopped a few feet from where I'd been standing the night before, then turned back toward the trees. The rest of the day was normal. No sign of the light. The lake looked ordinary, just white ice with patches of snow. I stayed another night, though I thought about leaving. I guess I just wanted to prove to myself it was nothing. The third night, I woke up again around the same time. 2:15, give or take. The tent wasn't glowing this time, but there was a faint reflection outside, like moonlight on wet glass. I unzipped the flap and saw it again. The light drifting under the ice farther out toward the middle of the lake now. It wasn't moving along the shore this time. It was circling slowly, maybe 100 feet from land. Still that same dim blue-white, still pulsing faintly. I decided to stay in the tent this time. I watched from there, peeking through the flap. After maybe 10 minutes, another light appeared. Smaller, dimmer, a little farther away. It joined the first one, moving in parallel, both tracing slow arcs beneath the frozen surface. They crossed paths once, and when they did, everything dimmed at once, like the light beneath the ice drained for a second, leaving only darkness before flaring back to normal. I must have watched them for half an hour. Then, without warning, both lights blinked out at the exact same moment. The lake went black again. That was when I heard the sound. It started low, a deep, distant hum that seemed to come from under the ground more than the air. It was faint, but steady, like a diesel engine idling miles away. Except it wasn't coming from any direction I could pinpoint. It was everywhere at once. The snow around my tent vibrated slightly, just enough that I could feel it through my sleeping bag. My metal lantern, which was hanging on the tent pole, light gave off a faint buzz. The zipper on the tent trembled against the fabric. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, but the light flickered. The beam cut in and out like the batteries were dying. I had just put new ones in that morning. The humming went on for maybe a minute, then faded. When it stopped, the silence was heavier than before, like the air itself was thick. I waited, barely breathing, for something else to happen. Nothing did. By morning, there was a hairline crack running from the shoreline out toward the middle of the lake, ending near where I'd last seen the lights. It wasn't there the day before. I packed up around noon. Before I left, I walked out onto the ice, following the crack. You could see a few inches down through the cloudy surface, and for a second I thought I saw something darker embedded in the ice, a shape maybe, or a shadow. But the light changed, and it was gone. When I got back to the truck, I noticed something strange on the windshield. A thin layer of frost, even though it hadn't snowed or frosted overnight. In the middle of it, right above the steering wheel, was a clear patch about the size of my hand. A perfect oval where the frost hadn't formed. I wiped it off and drove home. I haven't been back to Lake Owen since. I tell myself it was just something natural, maybe trapped gas, some weird reflection, or the way ice refracts light. That's the logical answer. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that faint blue glow drifting under the surface like it was waiting for me to move closer. I was driving back from Ridgecrest late one night, around 11:30, heading east toward Barstow. There's this stretch of desert highway between Trona and the 395 that I've always hated. Just miles of flat nothingness. The kind of road where the only thing keeping you company is the sound of the tires on cracked asphalt. I had the windows down because the air conditioner in my old Tacoma barely worked, and even though it was late, the air still had that baked desert smell, like hot dust and dry weeds. I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. The radio was cutting in and out, just static mostly. I didn't even have cell service out there, which wasn't unusual. You lose signal the second you pass the salt flats. I was mostly zoned out, headlights catching little bits of tumbleweed and patches of loose sand blowing across the road. Then I noticed something weird about the stars. I always use them as a sort of mental clock on those drives. When you're that far out, away from town lights, the sky is bright with them, layers on layers, like someone spilled salt across black glass. But I looked up and realized there were fewer than before. At first I thought a cloud was rolling in, which made no sense because the forecast was clear and there wasn't even a hint of haze earlier. But the stars weren't fading like they do with clouds. They were vanishing in neat gradual rows from west to east, like someone was pulling a huge invisible curtain across the sky. I slowed down without realizing it. The truck coasted to maybe 40. The night air felt different, thicker somehow. I leaned forward over the steering wheel and squinted, trying to see what could be blocking that much sky, but there was nothing to see. No outline, no shadow, no texture. Just absence. Row by row, the stars went out. The weird part was how clean it looked. No gradient, no blur. Each line of stars just blinked out, perfectly straight, like something massive and perfectly flat was moving over me, slowly enough that I could track its edge by how the stars disappeared behind it. There was no sound at first. Then I noticed the quiet. Not silence, but that kind of muffled pressure that makes your ears feel clogged. The wind through the open window had died. Even the truck's engine seemed quieter, like it was being swallowed by distance. My gut told me to pull over. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, gravel crunching, and shut off the engine. The desert swallowed the noise almost instantly. I stepped out. The ground was still warm under my boots. The air smelled dry and faintly metallic, which didn't make sense. Above me, the dark gap where the stars had been was spreading, wide enough now that I could tell it wasn't cloud cover. It was darker than the sky around it, a kind of black that didn't reflect anything, not even the faint glow from my headlights. I turned the headlights off too. That was when I really saw it. It was big, impossibly big, and moving so slowly it barely looked like motion at all. The gap stretched across maybe half the sky now, and I realized I couldn't see where it ended in either direction. It wasn't blocking light so much as erasing it. The desert in front of me, the horizon line, even the dim starlight on the rocks. Everything just fell away into this silent darkness that kept advancing. I remember standing there waiting for some kind of noise, an engine, wind, anything. But it was like the world was holding its breath. Then came a low vibration. Not a sound exactly, more like a feeling deep in my chest, like standing near a huge generator. My keys rattled faintly in my pocket. The truck's antenna started humming, just barely, like it was catching some invisible signal. The hair on my arms rose up. I backed up toward the truck, eyes still on the sky. The dark shape above had reached directly overhead, blotting out everything except a few rows of stars along the far edge of the horizon. There was this faint shimmer near the leading edge. Not lights exactly, but a distortion, like heat haze, except it was cold out now. I could feel it on my skin, the temperature dropping fast. Then, suddenly, all the power in the truck went out. No headlights, no dash lights, nothing. My phone screen went dark too, even though I hadn't touched it. I got back into the cab and tried the ignition. Dead. Not even a click. I tried again. Same thing. I reached for the flashlight I keep in the glove box. Nothing. The batteries were fine earlier that day. The only thing left was the faint sound of gravel shifting under the tires, even though I wasn't moving. I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. It was this tiny crackling noise, almost electrical, like static running through sand. I looked up again and realized the stars on the other side of the sky were starting to reappear. Line by line, the darkness was moving away, or maybe passing over entirely. It wasn't until it cleared the patch above me that I saw how sharp the edges were. It wasn't rounded like a cloud, it was angular, geometric. Not perfectly straight, but close, with little dips and ridges like some massive, uneven plate sliding through the atmosphere. As it kept drifting east, I saw something even stranger, faint glimmers of light within it. Not steady or symmetrical, more like dim reflections, as if something metallic deep inside was catching light that shouldn't exist. The glow was soft and colorless, like reflections off brushed steel. And then, just like that, the sound came back. The air pressure released. My ears popped. The wind returned in a slow sweep that smelled like dust and sagebrush. My truck's dome light flicked on by itself, and the dash lights followed all at once. The headlights blinked on without me touching the switch. The radio, which had been silent for nearly 10 minutes, came back mid-song, but slower, like the track was dragging through molasses. I turned the key again. The engine started like nothing had happened. I sat there for a while, just letting the truck idle. I didn't move until I could see the last of the shape fade beyond the far hills. The stars came back perfectly, crisp and still. Everything looked normal again. When I finally started driving, I noticed the clock on the dash read 12:11. That made sense, except when I checked my phone later, it said 12:23. I didn't think much of it until I remembered looking at the clock when I first pulled over. It had read 11:46. I should have been there maybe 5-10 minutes tops, not nearly 40. The rest of the drive was quiet. No static, no more vanishing stars, just that strange, tight feeling in my chest like the air hadn't fully returned to normal. When I reached Barstow, I pulled into a gas station and went inside to grab a drink. The cashier, a guy about my age, looked at me funny. He said I had sand in my hair. I brushed it off and he said, "No, it's like glitter or something." I went to the bathroom to check. Under the fluorescent light, there were tiny flecks on my jacket and around my collar. Not glitter exactly, but tiny metallic specks that shimmered dull silver. When I tried to wipe them off, they just smeared, leaving faint gray streaks on my skin. I washed them away as best I could, but they left this faint metallic smell on my hands that soap didn't cut. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself it was dust from the road, maybe residue from the air vent or some weird mineral in the wind. But the next morning when I went to start the truck, I noticed a thin film of the same gray dust on the hood and windshield, only in the middle. A perfect rectangle, about the size of a car door, as if something had rested there overnight. There were no footprints, no handprints, just that faint, metallic smell again when I touched it. It was gone by afternoon. I drove that same route again a few weeks later. The stars stayed put, the radio worked fine, everything was normal. But sometimes when I hit that same stretch of desert at night, I get that weird feeling again, like the air's waiting for something. And without thinking, I glance up at the sky to make sure the stars are still there. I was driving back from Spokane on a Sunday evening, taking the back roads through eastern Washington instead of the highway. It was late summer, still hot even though the sun was starting to set. The air had that burnt orange haze to it. Not quite smoke, just the dry dust hanging in the distance. I wasn't in a rush. I had the windows down, music low, and I kept stopping every now and then to take pictures. I like photographing sunsets, even though I'm not great at it. Around 8 o'clock, I pulled over at this long stretch of road near Harrington. There's this huge open plain with wheat fields on both sides and these rolling hills that look gold in the right light. It was one of those moments where everything looked perfectly balanced. The road straight ahead, sun just above the horizon, the sky turning pink and purple. I parked my car off to the side, grabbed my phone, and started snapping a few shots. I noticed it after maybe the third or fourth photo, a small, dark shape just sitting above the horizon line, way off to the left. I thought it might be a drone at first. It wasn't moving, not even a little. It was too big to be a bird, and it didn't look like a plane. It was just this solid little spot in the sky, kind of oblong, but it could have been anything. I took a couple of pictures that way, mostly because I liked how the silhouette looked against the sun. After a minute, I realized it was still there. Perfectly still. I zoomed in on my phone, but the image got all fuzzy, so I tried watching it with my eyes instead. It didn't blink or reflect light, which ruled out a drone or balloon, I guess. I watched it for another 30 seconds, maybe longer, before I started feeling kind of weird about it, like it was aware of me, even though that made no sense. I got back in my car and drove a little further down the road, maybe half a mile. I figured if it was something stationary, like a tower or weather balloon, my angle would change and I'd see it differently. But when I stopped again, the thing was still right there in the same spot. The sun had dipped lower by then, and the sky was dimming fast. The object looked darker, sharper against the clouds now. I took one more photo, and this time I heard a low hum, like an electrical buzz, but I couldn't tell if it came from my car or the thing itself. Then it was gone. I don't mean I watched it leave. I mean I blinked, and it wasn't there anymore. No movement, no streak, just gone. I figured maybe I lost it in the changing light, or it went behind a cloud. But when I scanned the whole horizon, there was nothing. Just empty sky. I didn't think much more of it until I got home. I uploaded the photos to my laptop like I usually do, just to see if any turned out decent. The first few were normal. Golden fields, nice lighting, a bit of lens flare. Then I opened the one where I'd seen the object near the horizon. Sure enough, there it was, a dark shape hanging low in the frame, maybe a quarter-inch above the ground line, dead center. When I zoomed in, I expected it to be blurry, but it wasn't. It had a clear outline, almost too sharp for the distance. It looked like a teardrop pointed downward, with a faint gray halo around it. Then I opened the next photo. In that one, the object looked much closer, not zoomed in, closer. It filled more of the frame, like it had moved toward me even though I hadn't taken a step. The details were clearer. Smooth surface, no wings, no seams. The shape was the same, that teardrop form still pointing down, but the lighting on it didn't make sense. It was dark all around, but the object had a faint glow that didn't match the sunset or any visible reflection. In the next photo, the one I took maybe 2 seconds later, it was gone completely. The horizon was empty again. I checked the timestamps, all within a 5-second window. 3 photos. The first with it far away, the second with it appearing closer, and the third with nothing at all. I thought maybe it was an issue with my camera's focus or a lens flare that shifted with the angle, but the light direction didn't change between the shots. I even checked the metadata. Exposure, ISO, all identical. That's when I noticed something else. In the second photo, the one where the object appeared closer, there was a faint shape reflected in my windshield. I hadn't realized the car's hood was visible in the bottom of the frame. The reflection showed my phone and a bit of the sky above, and just above the phone in the reflection was something else. At first I thought it was just a smudge or light distortion, but when I zoomed in I could see what looked like another shape, much smaller and almost like a second version of the same object hovering directly above me. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it looked like. The reflection of a dark, rounded object directly over where I was standing. I went back outside to look at the sky, even though it was full dark by then. The stars were out, the air had cooled off, and everything was quiet. I stood in my driveway staring up, half expecting to see something, but it was just empty space. Later that night, I tried taking more photos of the sky, just to compare lighting and reflections, but none of them looked even close. There was nothing strange in any of them. The next morning, I decided to drive back out to the same spot. I left early before sunrise and parked in the same pull-off. The air was cold, and there was a faint mist across the fields. Everything looked smaller somehow, less impressive without that golden light. I stayed there about 20 minutes, waiting to see if anything would happen. Nothing did. I went to work later that day, and I mentioned it to a coworker, just in passing. Her name's Dana. She's into photography too, so I showed her the pictures on my phone. She asked if I'd edited them, and I told her no, just raw shots. She zoomed in on the second photo and frowned, then asked if I'd noticed the light near the top corner. There was a faint white streak I hadn't seen before, barely visible unless you brightened the image. It looked like motion blur, like something passing through the shot fast enough to leave a trace. It wasn't a plane. It had no trail, no taper, just a perfect line of white. I didn't have a good answer. That night, around the same time I'd taken the photos, I was sitting outside on my back porch. I wasn't expecting anything. I just wanted some air. The crickets were loud, the neighborhood quiet. Then I heard a hum again, faint like an electrical transformer, but steadier, almost rhythmic. I walked out into the yard and looked up. For a while I didn't see anything. Then, just above the tree line to the west, I caught a small flash, not bright, just a pulse of white. Then another, a little higher up. They weren't blinking like airplane lights. They were slow, random, almost drifting. I stood there watching as two of the faint lights moved across the sky together, smooth, perfectly parallel, completely silent. They weren't close, but they moved in a way that didn't make sense for planes. No sound, no wobble, just a kind of gliding motion, too deliberate to be satellites. After a minute, one of them stopped moving. The other continued until it faded into the distance. The one that stayed behind dimmed slightly, then went completely out. The hum in the air stopped at the same time. I waited another 5 minutes before going back inside. I didn't tell anyone else about it. I still have the photos, though I don't look at them much anymore. Every now and then, I think about driving back out to that same stretch of road at sunset just to see if anything happens again. But I always talk myself out of it. I don't know what I photographed. It's probably something simple, something I'm overthinking. But every time I scroll past that second image, the one where it's closer, I get the same feeling I did that evening on the road. Like it wasn't me watching it. It was the other way around. It happened last November on my way back from visiting my sister in Missoula. I left later than I should have, around 9, thinking I could make it home before midnight if I didn't stop. The drive usually takes about 2.5 hours, all mountain passes and long empty stretches where the radio turns to static. It had just started to snow when I got onto Highway 200, that fine, dry kind that looks like dust in the headlights. The temperature had dropped fast, and the roads were empty. I had the heater running low and my phone playing a podcast through the Bluetooth, but I remember turning the volume down because I kept thinking I heard something, faint noises behind the hum of the tires. It wasn't music or voices, more like short electrical pops. I assumed it was interference. The snow kept getting heavier the further I drove. The sky was dark but clear between the flurries, and every so often the clouds opened up and I could see stars. The road wound between tall pine trees that bent in over the guardrails, the kind of landscape that looks endless at night. I was maybe 30 miles from home when the lights in the car dimmed. Not all at once, they faded slowly, like someone was turning a dial. The dash lights went dull, the radio screen flickered, and the interior lights above my head glowed faintly before dying. The headlights stayed on, but they seemed weaker too, like the beams were being swallowed by the snow. I glanced at the battery light, but nothing had come on. Everything still worked, the engine, the heat, even the Bluetooth, just quieter somehow. For a few seconds, I thought it might be my alternator going bad, but then I noticed the silence. I didn't realize until that moment how much background noise there usually is when you drive. The fan, the tires, the low hum of the road. It all seemed muted, like I was underwater. Then the sky flashed. It wasn't lightning. There were no clouds for that. It was just one clean pulse of white light, bright enough to turn the snow silver and cast hard shadows through the trees. I actually ducked like an idiot, thinking maybe a power line had blown above me or something exploded in the distance. The light vanished as quickly as it came, but in that one instant, I saw the road ahead. And that's when I noticed the shapes. They were on both sides of the road, spaced evenly along the tree line as far as my headlights reached. Tall, narrow figures, maybe a dozen on each side. They weren't moving. They weren't trees either. I could see the trunks of the pines behind them. These were thinner, straighter, more like silhouettes than bodies. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. My first thought was that I was seeing shadows from the light flash, like an afterimage. But they stayed there, motionless, all the way down that stretch of road. When I passed the first one, I could tell it was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, completely black, like it absorbed the headlights instead of reflecting them. I couldn't make out arms or faces, just long vertical forms that almost looked cut out of the air. I kept driving. The further I went, the more I started to convince myself they were just some weird trick of perspective. Maybe fence posts or young trees without branches. But there was a pattern to them that didn't fit. They stood the same distance apart, perfectly aligned, every 20 feet or so. After about 30 seconds, I passed the last one. The road curved left, and suddenly, they were gone. The car's interior lights flickered back on right after that. Not gradually this time. They just snapped to life, bright and normal. The heater picked up again. The noise of the tires came back. It was like someone had flipped a switch. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, trying to tell myself I'd imagined it. When I got into town, I pulled into the gas station on Main just to calm down and check my car. Everything seemed fine. I popped the hood, checked the battery terminals, all tight, no corrosion. I even turned the lights off and on a few times. Perfectly normal. I went inside for a coffee, and the woman at the counter, Carla, said I looked pale. I told her I thought I saw something weird on the road, and she laughed and said people see all kinds of things on that stretch late at night. Elk, moose, even a few black bears that wander too close to the shoulder. I didn't tell her what I'd actually seen. When I got home, it was close to midnight. My dog didn't come to the door like she usually does. She was in the hallway, whining at the back window that faces the woods. I looked outside, but there was nothing, just dark trees and falling snow. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went back to the kitchen for water, and that's when I heard the same faint electrical popping sound again, like short bursts of static. It was coming from the direction of the car. I stepped outside and listened. It was quiet except for the snow hitting the porch. Then I heard it again. 3 sharp pops in quick succession, then silence. The air felt charged, like right before a storm. My phone screen glitched when I tried to turn on the flashlight, freezing for a second before the light came on. I walked to the driveway, checked the car. No lights, no movement, nothing unusual. I went back inside. The next morning, everything looked normal. The snow had stopped, the sky was bright, and the road in front of the house was clear. But when I went to start the car, it hesitated. The engine cranked slowly before catching, like the battery had drained a little overnight. I didn't think much of it until I checked the dash camera I'd installed last summer. It runs on a loop and saves footage from each trip automatically. When I plugged it into my laptop, the file from that night was corrupted. It played fine up until the timestamp that matched when the interior lights dimmed. Then the screen went black for about 20 seconds. No sound, no picture. When it came back on, I was already past the curve, after the shapes had disappeared. The weird part is that the blackout section wasn't actually missing from the video. The file length was continuous, like something had just recorded pure black the entire time. I tried brightening the frames, adjusting contrast, nothing. Just empty black. A week later, I drove that same stretch again during the day. I stopped at roughly the same spot, looking for anything that could explain what I saw. Fence posts, markers, new saplings, whatever. There was nothing. The trees grew close to the road, unevenly spaced, no clearings or lines that could match the pattern I remembered. It's not a part of the road I like driving anymore. Even in daylight, it feels too still, like sound doesn't carry right there. The air feels heavier somehow. The dash cams worked fine ever since. No power problems, no flickering lights. But sometimes, if I'm driving alone at night and the radio crackles for no reason, I still find myself glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see those same shapes standing there again, perfectly still, waiting for another flash of light. It was late August, one of those heavy, humid nights where the air doesn't move at all. I was sitting on the porch after dinner, just killing time before bed. My wife, Erin, was already inside watching something on TV, and I had a beer and a bug candle going, half watching the sky. We live on the edge of town, right where the houses start to thin out into fields and patches of woods. It's quiet most nights except for the bugs, the constant wall of sound from crickets and cicadas that never really stops this time of year. That night was no different, at least at first. I'd been sitting out there maybe 15-20 minutes. The sky was hazy, not much wind, just that thick stillness that comes before a storm but never quite turns into one. I remember thinking I could hear the hum of the streetlight at the end of the driveway under all the insect noise. Then it all cut off. Every sound. Just gone. No crickets, no cicadas, no frogs from the ditch across the road. Nothing. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I thought maybe my hearing had popped or something, like when you come up fast in an elevator, but it wasn't that. The air itself felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. I sat there frozen, listening, waiting for something to start back up. I don't know why, but I remember checking my watch without even thinking about it. It was 10:47 p.m. exactly. The silence lasted long enough for me to get uncomfortable. Not scared yet, just aware. I could hear my own breathing. I started counting seconds in my head, maybe out of habit. Around the 30-second mark, a sound faded in, a high-pitched tone. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just this thin, sharp ringing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not like a whistle or a machine. It didn't pulse or change, just one steady pitch hanging in the air. I stood up, looking toward the tree line across the yard. It was too dark to see much, just the faint outlines of the oaks and the glow of the streetlight through the branches. The sound didn't seem closer or farther, just there, like the air itself was making it. Erin opened the front door then, asking if I'd called her. I turned, and she froze too. "You hear that?" she said. I nodded. We both just stood there, listening. The sound didn't waver. It was high enough to make your teeth hurt a little if you focused on it. After another few seconds, she said, "It's the TV, right?" and went back inside. I followed her in, mostly because I didn't want to be out there alone anymore. Inside, it was quieter. The tone was still there, but muffled, like it was outside the walls. The TV was playing fine. I muted it, thinking maybe there was interference or something in the speakers, but no. The tone stayed exactly the same. Then the lights flickered once. Not enough to go out, just that quick dip you get when the power grid hiccups. Erin gave me this look, kind of half annoyed, half nervous. "Probably the transformer again," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. I went back out to check the yard. The air felt colder. That was the first thing I noticed. Not cool, like a breeze. It was still hot, but there was a sharpness to it, like walking into a room with an open freezer. The bugs still hadn't come back. The tone kept going. Unbroken. I started walking down the driveway toward the road. The sound didn't change as I moved, but at some point I noticed a faint vibration under my feet. It wasn't strong enough to rattle anything, just a subtle tremor you'd barely notice if you weren't paying attention. When I reached the end of the driveway, I looked down the street both ways. Nothing but empty asphalt and a few porch lights glowing in the distance. No cars, no wind. Then I saw something. A light about 100 yards away, moving through the trees on the far side of the road. It wasn't bright, just a faint white glow, steady and slow. My first thought was someone walking with a flashlight, but the way it moved didn't fit. It wasn't bouncing or sweeping around, it was drifting, level, about 10 feet off the ground. I watched it pass between two trees and vanish. The sound didn't stop. A few seconds later, another light appeared, farther down. Same glow, same slow, deliberate movement. This one paused for a second before sliding sideways, not turning, just gliding like it was on rails, then disappearing behind a stand of pines. I stood there in the dark for what felt like forever, watching for more. Nothing. The tone ended as suddenly as it began. No fade out, just silence again. And then, one by one, the crickets started up. It was almost mechanical, like they were turning back on in sequence. I walked back to the porch, my ears ringing from the sudden return of sound. Erin opened the door as I got there. "It stopped," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Did the power flicker again?" She shook her head. "No, but the TV froze for a second. Just the picture, not the sound." We didn't talk about it much after that. We went to bed around midnight. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint humming noise coming from outside. Not the same tone. This was lower, almost like a generator running far away. I got up, looked out the window. The yard was dark, but I could see a faint glow in the sky beyond the trees. Not lightning, not a plane. Just a soft, colorless light that seemed to shift slightly, like it was moving behind clouds. I stood there for maybe a minute before it faded. When I checked the clock, it was 2:19. The next morning, Erin mentioned she'd woken up too, around the same time. She said she thought she heard the refrigerator humming louder than usual. When I told her what I saw, she gave me that same uncertain look, the kind people give when they don't want to call you crazy, but also don't want to believe you. I didn't bring it up again until a few days later. We were having coffee out on the porch Saturday morning. It was cooler, bright and clear, the kind of day that makes the whole week before feel like a dream. Around 9, our neighbor, Tom, came over to borrow a socket wrench. He mentioned something weird. Said his dog had gone nuts a few nights earlier, whining and scratching at the door around 11. Wouldn't calm down for almost an hour. I asked him which night that was. He said Thursday, the same night. I didn't tell him what happened, but later when I was mowing the yard, I noticed something in the grass near the end of the driveway. 3 small circular spots about a foot wide each where the grass had gone pale and brittle, like it had been scorched but not burned. They were spaced evenly apart in a line that pointed toward the trees across the road. The mower stuttered a little when I passed over them, like it hit a magnetic pull or drag for half a second, then went back to normal. By the time Erin came out, the marks already looked lighter, like the color was returning. I didn't mention them. The next few nights were normal. The insects were loud again, the air heavy and alive the way it always is in late summer. But every once in a while, around the time, 10:47, I'd stop what I was doing and listen, half expecting the silence to come back. It hasn't. Not yet. But a couple of times since then, I've caught that high, thin tone faintly, just under the noise of everything else. Not constant, not strong. Just there for a few seconds, like it's testing the air, waiting for the right time to return. I woke up to this weird hum, like static. Not loud, just a faint electrical buzz that didn't sound like anything in my apartment normally makes. It took me a second to realize the whole room was lit up. Every screen, my laptop, TV, alarm clock, tablet, everything that could glow was glowing. All of them were just blank white screens. I sat up, still half asleep, thinking maybe the power had flickered or my smart plugs glitched. But it wasn't just that they were on. The light was too bright, almost clinical, like hospital lighting. My eyes watered. I reached over and tried to unplug the lamp first, but it didn't turn off. Nothing did. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. that tingling heaviness that makes the tiny hairs on your arms stand up. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and as soon as I picked it up, the screen shifted from white to black. Then a message appeared in plain, centered text. Look up, no notification sound, no app open, just those words. I froze. I thought maybe it was a prank, like some malware or remote control thing, but my phone was on airplane mode. I always sleep with it that way. I remember holding it for a second, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. The room was completely silent, except for that faint hum, like static somewhere deep in the walls. I did look up eventually. The ceiling looked normal at first, just then I noticed this. Glow. Not bright, not coming from any one place, but a sort of diffuse light spreading over the ceiling. Like the white from the screens was reflecting upward, but it wasn't. The angle didn't make sense. It was coming from above, through the ceiling somehow, like a hidden light source bleeding through the plaster. I sat there staring, trying to make sense of it, until I realized all my electronics were flickering slightly now. Just subtle pulses of brightness, in sync with the hum. Every time the light dimmed, the hum got quieter. Every time it brightened, the hum rose again. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell is happening?" just to hear my own voice. It sounded small in the room. The message on my phone disappeared. Then it came back again. Same words. Look up. At that point, I actually laughed. One of those nervous, stupid laughs that come out when you're scared and trying not to be. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside was completely still. The streetlights were out. No headlights, no movement. Just a flat, pale glow over everything, like the moon behind fog. Except there was no fog, and the sky wasn't the right color. It was more silver gray, almost metallic. I cracked the window open. The air outside was colder than it should have been for June. No crickets, no traffic, nothing. Just that hum again, but louder now, like it was coming from the sky itself. I leaned out a little and looked up. There was something there. Not a light exactly, more like a distortion. A section of the sky that looked bent, like heat rising off asphalt, except it wasn't shimmering randomly. It held its shape. A wide, circular patch, maybe 100 feet across, just wrong. Like the stars around it were being pulled slightly toward the center. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks from the screen glare, but when I looked again, it was still there. I couldn't see edges, but I could feel them. The air underneath it looked compressed somehow, like the atmosphere itself was bending inward. The hum deepened, not louder, lower, like a vibration under my ribs. I felt it before I heard it. And then, as if on cue, every light in my apartment shut off at once. Total darkness. I dropped my phone, and the sound of it hitting the floor was weirdly muffled, like the air had gone thick. I stood still, listening. My eyes adjusted a little, and I could still make out the glow through the window, faint but steady. I crouched, found my phone by touch, and when I picked it up again, it was dead. No light, no response. That's when I noticed the other sounds in the building. Doors creaking, slow footsteps above me. I live on the top floor. There's no apartment above mine. I stared up at the ceiling again, and I swear I could see faint shadows moving behind the plaster. Not shapes exactly, just darker areas that shifted slowly, rhythmically, like something pacing. I tried to convince myself it was headlights from outside, but there were no cars, no lights at all. The hum rose again, and then everything went silent. Not quieter, silent. I couldn't even hear myself breathe. For a few seconds, it was like sound itself had been switched off. My ears felt clogged, like I'd gone underwater. Then, one short, sharp crack. A flash of light through the ceiling, just for a split second. Everything came back at once. The hum, the brightness, the screams. My TV turned on by itself, full volume static. I jumped back and nearly fell over the bed. And over the static, for maybe half a second, I thought I heard something. Like a whisper buried inside the noise. It wasn't words, not in any language I know. More like a rhythm, almost patterned. It stopped before I could process it. The light on the ceiling started to fade then, slowly. My electronics one by one shut off again, but this time it was more gradual, like the power was draining naturally. The hum got softer until it was gone. I stayed awake until dawn. I didn't sleep, just sat in the chair by the window, staring outside. When the sun finally came up, everything looked normal. The sky was blue, the birds were back, the streetlights were on schedule. My phone still wouldn't turn on until I plugged it in around 8 a.m. The battery had been at 64% before bed, but it was completely drained. When it finally booted up, the first thing that popped up was a calendar reminder I didn't make. It said, "Check window tonight." No time, no repeat setting, just that. I deleted it immediately. I called my friend Marcus later that day, told him I thought my wiring might be messed up. He came by in the afternoon with his multimeter, checked the outlets, the breakers, everything. No surges, no weird readings. He said the voltage was perfectly normal. I didn't tell him about the message or what I saw outside. That night, I left every device unplugged, even the alarm clock. I lay in bed in total darkness, waiting, not sure for what. Around 2 in the morning, my phone, on the nightstand, completely off, buzzed once. Just a short vibration. I grabbed it, and the screen flashed white for less than a second before going black again. No notifications, no log of it ever happening. I kept the light on after that. A few days later, Marcus texted me asking if I'd been messing with his phone somehow. He said his alarm had gone off the previous night with no set time, and when he looked at the screen, it said, "Look up." He swore he didn't type it, and I hadn't touched his phone since he came by. I didn't answer him. I just turned my phone off again and put it in a drawer. It's been a couple of weeks now. Everything's been normal since then, mostly. But every once in a while, when I'm walking home after dark, I get that same feeling, like the air is humming just a little too quietly and the streetlights dim in sync with it. I try not to look up anymore. I'd been hiking the Pine Ridge Trail near Mount Hood in Oregon that morning, and it was colder than I expected for late September. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones if you stop moving for even a few minutes. I was wearing my usual layers, a flannel under a down vest, gloves, wool socks, but I still felt the chill. The trail was quiet, only the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional bird call. The sky was overcast, the clouds low and gray, with that heavy dampness that makes everything smell like wet pine and soil. I'd been hiking alone for hours, which I normally liked. I find that solitude helps me think. But this morning, there was this nagging sense that I wasn't alone, even though I hadn't seen another person all day. Nothing obvious, no footsteps, no voices, just a feeling that I was being watched. Around 10:30, I stopped at a bend where the trail narrowed, with steep rock walls on one side and thick pines on the other. I set my pack down to grab water, and that's when I noticed it. A shimmer in the air about 20 feet ahead of me. At first, I thought it was heat rising off a sunlit rock, but there was no sun. The clouds were thick, the rocks wet and dark. It was subtle, almost like a mirage, but wrong. The shimmer moved slightly, not with the wind, not like a heat haze. It kind of drifted, shifting as if it knew I was looking at it. I blinked a few times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks. I waved my hand in front of it. The shimmer didn't distort in the usual way. It sort of pulled back, almost like it was avoiding my hand. My first thought was some weird reflection, maybe water vapor or a trick of the clouds against the rocks. But it didn't make sense. The air was cold, too cold for any heat shimmer, and there was no moisture in that exact spot. I started walking again, slow, cautious, trying to see if it stayed put. And it did, only it wasn't static. As I moved, the shimmer moved too, not in a straight line, but almost lazily, like it was gliding in the air just above the forest floor. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't random either. I told myself I was imagining things, that my brain was bored or tired. I was tired. I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. for the drive. But the feeling in my chest was that sort of tight unease you get when something doesn't add up. Something that's watching but not doing anything. I took a deep breath and picked up my pace, trying to shake it off. About 20 minutes later, I reached a clearing. There was a fallen log I sometimes stop at for a snack, and I sat down. I kept glancing back the way I came, half expecting to see a deer or a hiker. That's when I noticed it again. The shimmer just beyond the edge of the clearing. This time it was closer, but I swear it hadn't moved any faster than I had. It just anticipated me, like it knew I would stop. I felt my stomach twist. I had my phone out, planning to check the GPS and maybe take a picture, but I hesitated. Every time I raised the phone, the shimmer seemed to distort, like it was aware of the lens. I lowered it. That was enough to make my hands tremble. I didn't want to panic, didn't want to feed into whatever this was, but it was getting harder to pretend it was normal. I ate a granola bar in silence, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. When I looked up, the shimmer was gone. I scanned the surrounding forest, slow, careful. No movement, nothing but the usual pines, ferns, and rocks. My heartbeat slowed a little. Maybe it really was nothing. I packed up and continued. The trail started to slope downward, and I felt safer, more like myself. But then it happened again. This time I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a distortion in the air, low to the ground, moving along the side of the trail like a shadow with no edges. I froze. My boots made no sound on the wet leaves as I shifted my weight back. The shimmer stopped when I stopped. I tried to rationalize. A reflection of sunlight? No, still overcast. A trick of my eyes? Maybe, but I'd never hallucinated something this persistent. Animals? There were no animals that could move like that, so smoothly, so aware. And the forest was too quiet for any of the usual sounds to explain it. I forced myself to keep walking. Every time I turned a corner, it was gone, only to reappear further down the trail as if it had followed me. And it wasn't consistent with the wind. Leaves around it rustled normally, unaffected, but the air inside the shimmer was still. There was a faint distortion, almost like a heat wave in reverse. Nothing around it blurred except the shimmer itself. After what felt like forever, I reached a section where the trail ran along a ridge. From there, I could see a valley below, mist clinging to the treetops. I paused, letting myself breathe and enjoy the view, and that's when I noticed something else. The trail behind me looked different. Not physically different, no, it was the light. Everything had a strange wash to it, a faint silver shimmer that hadn't been there before. And then I realized my watch was a few minutes off. I swear I had checked it 10 minutes ago, but somehow 15 minutes had passed. I felt my stomach tighten again. I didn't see the shimmer for a while after that, just the normal forest. But the feeling persisted, the sense of being watched, of something moving in tandem with me. I started walking faster, talking to myself out loud to break the tension. Just a weird reflection. You're fine. Nothing here. By the time I got back to the trailhead, it was late afternoon. The sun had started to break through the clouds, and the air felt warmer. My truck was exactly where I'd left it. I locked the doors, got in, and started the engine. For the first few minutes, I told myself it was over. Then, as I pulled onto the road, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. A shimmer in the distance on a slope parallel to the road. It moved, slowly, deliberately, and then vanished. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. When I got inside, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the yard. I wanted to tell someone anything, but I couldn't. My story would sound insane. That night, I kept thinking about the shimmer. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a reflection. It moved with awareness. It followed, almost, but not aggressively. Not like it wanted to harm me. And the weirdest part? There were moments where I could swear it paused, as if waiting for me to catch up. I didn't go back to Pine Ridge for a long time. When I did, I took a different trail, one I knew was crowded on weekends. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest remembered me, that the shimmer had marked the path somehow. I've tried explaining it to myself rationally. Temperature inversions, light diffraction, heat shimmer in cold air. Nothing fits perfectly. And sometimes late at night, I'll remember that trail, that shimmer moving just a few feet ahead, aware of me, and I'll wonder if it's still there, somewhere, just waiting. I never saw it again, not in the daylight, not at night. But I can't shake the way the air seemed alive and how it always knew where I was. I was driving home from Portland to my parents' place in the Coast Range. It was late, probably close to 1 a.m., and the rain had been light all evening, just enough to make the asphalt slick and the windshield wipers sound like a dull rhythm. I had the heater on, fog creeping across the inside of the windows, and the highway practically to myself. Somewhere around the 26-mile marker, I noticed a pair of red taillights in the distance. Pretty normal for a late-night drive, except the lights were steady, no brake flickers or turning signals, just a constant small dot of red far ahead. I shrugged it off, thinking it was someone driving the speed limit, keeping their distance. I followed for a while, not close, just passing the miles in silence, the taillights staying maybe half a mile ahead. The road curved through the hills, and every time I thought I was catching up, they were still there, perfectly placed on the black ribbon of asphalt. There weren't any side streets that far out, just the highway cutting through the forested hills, and no towns for at least 20 minutes in either direction. After maybe 20 minutes, I started to notice little things. The lights didn't behave like a normal car. Sometimes they'd slow down a little, like they were pausing, then accelerate again without reason. I'd swear I'd see them drift slightly off the lane, but when I looked closer, it was just that. Some small, unexplainable motion, like they weren't bound to the road the way a car should be. I told myself it was a semi-truck, some old car bouncing over bumps, anything to make it normal. But then the weather got weirder. The rain picked up, sheets of water slapping against the windshield, but the area right in front of the lights stayed perfectly clear, as if the rain didn't reach them. I wiped the windshield and even sprayed the fluid, and it still stayed exactly the same. Clear, steady red dots against the dark road. After maybe half an hour, I realized the highway markers were passing faster than they should have, compared to the lights. I checked my speedometer, around 55, cruising carefully on wet asphalt, and the lights weren't far ahead anymore. But then, just as I was thinking I was catching up, the taillights lifted. Not in a curve, not gradually, they just started rising straight up. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd hit a patch of fog or my eyes were playing tricks. I slowed down, almost stopped, and watched. The lights rose slowly at first, then faster, straight into the sky. No noise, no reflection from clouds, just red dots ascending into the darkness above the tree line. I kept driving, staring up, gripping the wheel, my headlights cutting through the wet road. The rain was heavier now, but there was no splash, no change in the falling water under the lights. After a few seconds, the lights were gone. Just black sky and the sound of rain. I drove on, confused and shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder at the stretch of road I had just passed, half expecting the lights to drop back down. Nothing. I tried to convince myself I'd misread everything. Maybe it was a plane taking off or a power line reflection. But the angle was all wrong, the motion impossible, and the way the rain stayed clear around the lights, there was no explanation I could come up with. I called my brother, Matt, later that morning. I hesitated before telling him, but I wanted someone to hear it. I told him about the taillights, how they didn't follow the road, how they lifted into the sky. He laughed at first, said I was imagining things or the road was just messing with me. But when I said how the rain didn't touch them, he got quiet for a second. "No way," he said finally. "You're not just imagining the rain part." I drove the rest of the way home in silence, checking my mirrors obsessively. The fog in the windshield made everything worse. Every glint of light in the trees made me tense, but nothing else appeared. Just the sound of wipers, the hum of tires on wet asphalt, and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, breathing, staring at the dark trees beyond the lawn. The rest of the night passed normally, but I kept imagining red dots in the sky, hovering, rising endlessly. I tried going back to sleep, but the ceiling above me felt too dark, the shadows stretching differently than usual. The next day, I checked the local news, thinking maybe someone reported a weird plane, a helicopter, anything. Nothing. Even the weather report didn't mention unusual conditions, just rain and fog. A week later, I drove that highway again, this time in daylight. The road was empty, green hills on both sides, nothing to indicate the previous night. But the spot where I'd seen the lights rise felt different. I slowed to take it in, scanning the treetops. No marks, no scorch, no landing area. Just the road, slick from recent rain, and forest stretching into the distance. I've driven that highway a few times since, always at night, always careful. And I can't tell you why. But I watch the sky constantly now, checking the tree line, the horizon. The memory of those lights, the way they rose, the way they moved without regard for gravity or the road, sticks with me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined part of it, if my brain filled in gaps in the darkness. But the feeling isn't imagination. The way my chest tightened when they lifted, the way the air seemed heavier, like the storm itself was bending around those lights. It wasn't just a dream. And I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd tried to follow them higher into the sky instead of just watching. But I never did, and I never will. The red dots are still out there somewhere in my memory, rising straight up, carrying something I can't name. I was at my uncle's cabin in northern Minnesota when it happened. It was late July, humid and heavy, the kind of air that clings to your skin. The cabin sits on the edge of a lake called Vermilion Bay. Not big, but wide enough that when storms roll in, you can see them building miles away. That evening, I'd been sitting on the back deck with a beer, watching the clouds gather over the water. My uncle was in town for the night, so it was just me and his dog, Bear. It was one of those calm before the storm evenings. No wind, no waves, just the deep rumble of thunder way off in the distance. The air smelled metallic, like rain was already falling somewhere far off. I remember noticing how the light changed before the storm hit. The lake went this dull greenish gray, and the tree line across the water turned almost black. The first flash of lightning lit up the clouds from underneath, and I could tell the storm was huge, layered, tall, almost glowing in places where the sun still hit the top of it. I was mesmerized. Bear started pacing by the railing. He's normally lazy, but then he was restless. His ears twitched at every rumble. I figured maybe he sensed the pressure drop or heard thunder closer than I did. I reached down to scratch his head, but he just stared out toward the lake, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I turned my chair to face the storm again. The thunder got closer, sharper. A few fat drops of rain hit the deck, leaving dark spots on the wood. I thought about going inside, but I wanted to see the lightning hit the water. I've always found that strangely beautiful. Then it happened. A flash. So bright, it turned the entire lake white for a split second. I blinked hard, spots dancing in my vision, but in that fraction of a second, I saw something I couldn't explain. Above the storm, far higher than the clouds, there was a shape. Not light, not smoke, just a solid shadow, darker than anything else in the sky. Perfectly circular. It looked enormous, spanning across what had to be miles, and it wasn't stationary. It shifted slightly, not drifting like a cloud, but with a subtle precision, like it had control. Then it was gone. I just sat there, frozen. I remember whispering, "What the hell was that?" out loud. Bear was growling softly now, the sound low and steady. His hackles were up, and he was staring straight at the sky. I scanned the clouds, waiting for the next flash. When lightning struck again a few seconds later, I saw it again. Same spot, same perfect circle. Only now the edge of it glowed faintly, a dim rim of light outlining the darkness. It hovered there, absolutely still. My brain tried to make it something logical. A trick of light, maybe the underside of a weird cloud formation, but I'd never seen anything that geometrically perfect in nature. The thunder from that strike hit hard, shaking the deck under my feet. Bear whimpered and backed toward the door. I followed him inside, shut the sliding glass door, and turned off the lights so I could still see out. The rain started coming down hard, hammering the deck, but I could still make out the flashes through the glass. Every time the lightning hit, I looked for it. And every time, it was there. That huge black circle, faintly outlined, hovering right above the storm. Then, something stranger happened. The thunder started sounding delayed. Normally, you see the flash, then count a few seconds before hearing the boom, right? But the next few flashes just didn't line up with the sound at all. I'd see lightning, then hear the thunder immediately after, like it was right above me. Then another flash would come, but the thunder would lag by almost 10 seconds. The rhythm was all wrong. Bear started barking then, short, sharp barks directed at the ceiling. I tried calming him down, but he wouldn't even look at me. Just barked and growled like something was right above us. The rain eased up after maybe 20 minutes, and I cracked the door to listen. The air felt strange, thin, like it was missing that usual damp smell after a storm. The night was too quiet. Even the frogs and crickets were silent. Then, a flash lit up the clouds again, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. The shadow, the circular shape, it wasn't over the storm anymore. It was lower, much lower. It looked like it was pressing down on the clouds now, distorting them. The edge was so well defined that it couldn't be a natural formation. The way it blocked the lightning made it look solid. I remember stepping onto the deck again, barefoot, the boards slick with rain. The air buzzed faintly, that static feeling you get near power lines, but stronger. The hair on my arms lifted. The water on the lake was completely still, even though the storm should have stirred it up. The reflection of the clouds was visible, but the circular shape wasn't. It didn't reflect at all. It was like the water refused to show it. Then there was a flash of white light, not lightning this time. It came from inside the circle, not bright enough to blind me, but bright enough that it lit the entire sky around it. And it didn't fade instantly. It pulsed once, then dimmed, like something powering down. I stumbled back toward the door, heart pounding, grabbed Bear by the collar and pulled him inside. The dog was shaking, actually trembling. I turned off every light and sat on the couch by the window, staring out through the glass. The rain had stopped completely. No wind, just silence. For almost half an hour, I watched that shape hang there. It didn't move, didn't flicker. Occasionally, it would light up from within, faintly, like distant lightning inside the clouds, but always in that perfect circle. At some point, I realized I wasn't hearing thunder anymore, just that soft buzzing in the air. Then, without any flash or sound, it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The clouds didn't move to cover it. It just vanished, leaving only the faintest glow behind the storm before everything went dark again. I sat there a long time, not sure what to do. Eventually, the normal sounds started coming back. Crickets, wind through the trees, waves hitting the dock. The world just sort of resumed. When I finally went to bed, I noticed the power had cut out at some point. My phone was dead too, even though it had been plugged in. The next morning, everything worked fine again, except the radio. It only picked up static until around noon, when it suddenly came back on like nothing happened. I didn't mention it to anyone right away. When my uncle got back later that afternoon, I told him a storm rolled through, but left it at that. I thought maybe I'd imagined the shape, that it was some trick of perspective or my eyes adjusting to the lightning, but I couldn't shake how perfectly round it was. Clouds don't do that. A week later, I went back home to Duluth. A few nights after that, I got a text from my uncle. He said he'd been outside at the cabin around midnight, letting Bear out, and saw flashes of light over the lake again. He asked if the storms had been bad when I was there because, according to him, they hadn't had thunder this late in the season before. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the message, then out my apartment window, half expecting to see that same faint outline in the clouds. I haven't gone back to the cabin since. I was staying at my cousin Aaron's place in Rockport, Massachusetts for a few days last September. He and his wife had just moved into this small 2-story house a few blocks from the beach, kind of up on a hill where you could see the water if you leaned out the upstairs window. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. Grill some food, have a few beers, maybe take the kayaks out if the weather held up. The night it happened, the three of us had been down by the water earlier, just watching the tide come in. It was warm and windy, one of those late summer nights that feels like it's holding on to the last bit of heat before fall starts. By about 10:30, Aaron's wife had gone to bed, and he and I were still out on the back deck with a couple drinks, just talking about work and random stuff. The wind had picked up, and the ocean sounded louder than usual, kind of like static. At some point, Aaron said he was going to turn in too. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there for a while. The deck looked straight out toward the Atlantic, maybe half a mile of dark, open water between the house and the horizon. There weren't any boats out that I could see, just a faint line of distant lights from some trawlers farther down the coast. It was around midnight when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were plane lights, 3 of them, evenly spaced, low on the horizon. But they weren't blinking like normal navigation lights do. They were steady, bright white, maybe a little bluish, and too low to be aircraft. They were moving together, slow and deliberate, almost like something being towed, except there wasn't any sound or outline around them. I watched them for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights glided west to east, parallel to the shoreline. Then they slowed, like they'd come to a stop, and after a few seconds, more appeared. Three became five, then seven, until there were maybe 9 or 10 of them forming a perfect horizontal line. All the same size, all the same color, all evenly spaced. I remember thinking how precise it looked. Too precise. I went inside and grabbed my phone, thinking I'd try to record it, but when I came back out, the lights hadn't moved. They were just sitting there over the ocean, completely still. I started filming anyway, but when I looked through the screen, they barely showed up. Just faint dots, nothing like how bright they looked in person. After another minute or so, one of the lights blinked out, then another. Not like they dimmed. They just snapped off one by one, moving from left to right. No sound, no flash, no reflection on the water. When the last one disappeared, the horizon went completely black. I stood there waiting for them to come back, thinking maybe it was a trick of the eyes, or distant boat lights, or even drones. But the ocean stayed dark. There wasn't anything moving out there. I must have stayed on that deck another 20 minutes before I finally went inside. Aaron was asleep by then, so I just went to the guest room and lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about those lights. I tried to convince myself they were planes in a holding pattern or something, but I've lived near airports before. I know what that looks like. This was different. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. Aaron just laughed and said I'd probably seen fishing boats or helicopters. His wife mentioned maybe it was one of those offshore wind farms being worked on, but there aren't any visible from that part of the coast. I pulled up a map later just to check. Nothing. That night, I went back out to the deck around the same time. The ocean was calm, barely any wind. I stayed out there for an hour, maybe longer. Nothing unusual. Then, just as I was about to go in, I noticed something faint, a glow on the horizon. Not a light exactly, but more like the sky was getting slightly brighter in one narrow band above the water. I thought maybe a ship had turned on its deck lights, but as I watched, the brightness spread wider and then faded out again. It was subtle, but it didn't feel natural. Around 1 a.m., I finally went to bed. I didn't say anything to Aaron that time. I went back home to Vermont a few days later and didn't think much more about it. But about a week after that, I got a text from Aaron. Just a photo taken from his deck. It showed the same horizon I'd been watching, and a faint line of white lights. There were 5 this time, not as bright as what I'd seen, but definitely the same spacing, same formation. He wrote, "They're back." I called him right away, but he didn't answer. He texted about 15 minutes later saying they were gone again. I asked if he got video. He said he tried, but the camera wouldn't focus. After that, I didn't hear anything for a couple weeks. Then one night he called me. It was almost 2 in the morning. He sounded weird, kind of shaken. Said he'd been out walking his dog near the beach when he saw the lights again, only this time they weren't on the horizon. He said they were higher up, moving slowly inland, completely silent. He said they stopped directly above him, maybe a few hundred feet up, and he could see the glow reflecting faintly on the wet sand. Then, they just lifted straight up until they disappeared into the clouds. I asked him if there was any sound, and he said no, nothing. Even the wind had died down while it was happening. He said his dog started whining before he even saw the lights and wouldn't move until they were gone. I didn't know what to say. The next day, he sent me another text. Forget last night. Probably nothing. I haven't brought it up since. This past summer, I went back to visit him again. The nights were cooler, a little foggy. One evening after dinner, I found myself back on that same deck, just staring at the horizon. The ocean was calm and dark, no boats, no lights. I told myself it was just normal, that the ocean always looks strange at night, that light refracts weird over water. But standing there, I started to notice something else. The way the waves seemed to roll in out of sync, like there was a rhythm beneath them. A faint pulse in the reflection of the moonlight, as if something far out there was pushing against the surface. It could have been anything: current, tide, distant wakes. But I remember thinking how similar the pattern looked to that first line of lights. I stayed out there until I couldn't see the horizon anymore. Later that night, I woke up and noticed the blinds in the guest room glowing faintly. I thought maybe it was just the moon coming through, but when I looked outside, the sky over the ocean was completely lit up. Not like lightning, just a steady, pale light. No sound, no movement. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before fading out completely. The next morning, the news mentioned some unidentified aerial activity over Cape Ann. A few people reported strange lights to the Coast Guard, but nothing came of it. I asked Aaron if he saw it too. He said no. But that night, when we were sitting on the deck again, he kept glancing toward the horizon every few minutes, even when we were talking about something else. I don't think he realized he was doing it. Neither of us mentioned the lights. I woke up around 3:30 a.m. to the smell first. It was faint, metallic, like something had been burning softly in the room, but not enough to set off any alarms. My bedroom was dark, the kind of dark that makes it hard to tell shapes apart, but the smell made me sit up instantly. My heart was racing before I even had my eyes open. I flicked on the lamp next to the bed, and that's when I saw it. A thin line of grayish-white ash running across the carpet, perfectly straight from one wall to the other. I froze, not sure if I was seeing things or just dreaming. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Same thing. The carpet fibers were singed slightly along the edge of the line, but nothing else in the room showed any damage. No smoke, no scorch marks on the walls, no odor lingering anywhere else except in the room itself. I got out of bed slowly, careful not to disturb the line. Bear, my dog, was asleep in his crate at the foot of the bed. He didn't stir. I bent down to touch the ash with my finger, half expecting it to smear or disappear, but it was real, dry, cool, and strangely clean, like it had been placed there deliberately. I checked the rest of the room. Everything was in its normal place. My laptop was closed on the desk. Clothes were folded. Nothing smelled burnt, except that one tiny line across the carpet. I had left the window cracked slightly for ventilation, but the night air didn't carry anything unusual. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but the line was too precise for that. I'd been sleeping in this room for years, and I'd never seen anything like it. I grabbed my phone and checked the clock. 3:32 a.m. I texted my friend Jake, just, "Call me when you wake up. Weird thing happened." Of course, I knew he'd be asleep too, but it was like doing something normal would make me feel less crazy. I went to the kitchen for water, half watching the line from the corner of my eye. When I returned, I noticed something else. The line wasn't just straight, it was perfectly aligned with the edge of the desk. Not the room, not the walls exactly, but the desk. Like someone had measured it. I started pacing the room, trying to find a rational explanation. Candle wax? No candles in the room? Incense? Nothing like that. Electrical sparks? Everything was unplugged except the lamp. I even checked the smoke detector. No beep, no flash, just the faint smell lingering in the air. Bear woke up then, whining softly. He looked at me, then down at the line and growled once, not a normal warning growl. Low, almost deliberate. I froze. He'd never reacted like that to anything before. I knelt and petted him, trying to calm him down. He stayed tense, ears forward, staring at the ash. I decided to take a picture, thinking maybe that would help me process it. My phone camera didn't pick up the ash clearly at all. It showed a faint gray blur, but the edges were almost impossible to make out. In person, it was sharp, almost like someone had used a ruler to drag ash across the carpet. Then I noticed the faint smell again, stronger this time, not smoky or pungent, more like hot metal, like a soldering iron left too long. I followed it toward the window. The smell didn't intensify near the vent or air conditioner. It stayed inside the room. I went back to the bed and saw the line again. Something about it bothered me in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't alive, but it felt deliberate, like it had been placed there to be seen. My stomach tightened. I checked the rest of the house, no signs of ash elsewhere. The kitchen, living room, bathrooms, all normal. I even opened the windows, thinking maybe smoke from outside had drifted in. Nothing. The air smelled clean except in my bedroom. I tried sleeping on the couch in the living room. I didn't doze off for long. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the lines stretching across the carpet, exact and deliberate. Bear stayed at my side, tense, ears flicking toward the bedroom. By morning, the smell had faded, though the line remained. I swept carefully around it, thinking maybe it was something I could clean or vacuum. But it didn't smear. It stayed perfectly straight, almost as if the carpet itself had been marked that way. I called my friend Jake later that morning. I described it in detail. He suggested it might be some kind of strange electrical issue, Maybe the lamp or wiring in the wall sparking without triggering the smoke detector. I checked the outlets. Nothing. No warmth, no scorch marks. Every outlet in the room tested normal. I thought about calling an electrician, but I couldn't explain what they'd find. It wasn't a wiring problem. It wasn't sparking, shorting, or burning anything else. Just that one thin line of ash, perfectly straight, and the lingering smell of burnt metal. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize it. Dust, tiny rodent incident, candle ash settling overnight. None of it fit. I even cleaned the room thoroughly, hoping it would vanish after vacuuming. But it stayed, faint but defined, almost like the ash refused to be removed. One night, a week later, I woke again around the same time. I'd been sleeping lightly. The line seemed to shimmer, though I'm not sure how else to describe it. Not glowing, not moving, but almost like it was vibrating at the edge of my perception. Bear growled, low and steady, staring at the carpet again. I didn't touch it. I stayed in the living room that night, watching the bedroom from the doorway. The room felt colder than usual, though the thermostat hadn't changed. The smell was back faintly, metal and sharp. I eventually fell asleep on the couch, but I kept waking up to the same faint odor. Bear stayed beside me, restless. When morning came, the line was still there, unchanging, but the smell was gone. I've since moved the furniture slightly, cleaned the carpet rigorously, but the line persists. It's faint now, almost a shadow of ash rather than actual powder, but it's there, running from wall to wall, perfectly straight, perfectly deliberate. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night smelling that faint metal, and I check the line. It doesn't move, it doesn't grow, but every time I see it, I feel the same tightness in my chest. I don't talk about it to most people. Friends dismiss it as imagination, dreams, or stress. But I know what I saw. The precision, the smell, Bear's reaction, it's all real. And for now, that line is still there, marking my carpet, marking my life in a way I can't explain. I was driving through western Kansas late last spring, heading toward Colorado to visit my brother. I took back roads most of the way, long stretches of empty highway and farmland where you can go miles without seeing another car. It was one of those overcast evenings where the sky looks heavy and low, like it could rain but never quite does. The air was thick and the smell of wet soil carried through the vents. I had the windows cracked and the radio on low, just some local AM station fading in and out. About half an hour west of Great Bend, I noticed this soft, steady clicking sound coming through the speakers. It wasn't part of the broadcast, no music or static, just a rhythmic tick, 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 perfectly even, like a metronome. At first, I thought it was interference or a bad connection. I adjusted the tuner, but no matter where I set it, the clicking stayed. It wasn't loud, just constant. It had a kind of pattern to it, like two short clicks followed by one long one, repeating. I turned the volume all the way down, but the sound didn't stop. I thought maybe it was the engine, so I shut off the AC, rolled up the windows, and listened closely. It was definitely coming from the radio. I switched stations again, same thing. Even when the screen showed static, the clicking was still there. It wasn't totally unnerving at first, just odd. I kept driving, figuring it'd fade out once I got farther down the road, but it didn't. It stayed with me mile after mile, same steady rhythm. Around then, I passed a sign for a small town called Lorain. It's basically a few houses and a gas station, surrounded by flat farmland. I hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes, so I slowed down a little, trying to figure out what the radio was picking up. The sound wasn't mechanical, not like relay switches or a bad spark. It almost sounded intentional. When I drove under a set of power lines, the clicking sped up for just a second, then slowed again once I passed. I thought that was strange, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe interference from the electrical lines or something with the car's antenna. I drove another few miles, and that's when I noticed the fields. There were cows on both sides of the road, hundreds of them, spread out across the pasture land. But every single one of them was facing the same direction, north. Perfectly aligned, none grazing, none moving, just standing still, all turned the same way. That's when I pulled over. The clicking stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The silence hit me hard. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of highway noise. Even the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I sat there with my hand on the key, waiting to hear the clicking start up again. Nothing. I looked out at the field closest to the road. The cows were maybe 50 yards away, a whole herd of them frozen mid-graze, all staring in the same direction. Their ears didn't flick, their tails didn't move. Just a black and white line facing north. I turned the radio back on. Static. No clicking. I switched through every frequency, all the way up and down. Still nothing. I got out of the car. The smell of rain and manure hung in the air, but everything else felt wrong. The air was colder than before, noticeably colder. I walked to the edge of the ditch and stared out at the field. The cows were completely still. I could see their sides rising and falling as they breathed, but none of them turned their heads toward me. I shouted something, just a quick "hey," to see if they'd react. Not a single one moved. When I got back in the car and started the engine, the radio came alive again. The clicking returned, same rhythm, same volume. I sat there listening for maybe a full minute, trying to convince myself it was just interference. But then the clicking changed. The rhythm slowed, then paused, then started again, this time in shorter bursts, like it was responding to something. I turned the volume knob all the way down again, but the clicking didn't fade with it. It stayed exactly the same. Something about that made my stomach turn. I decided to get moving. As soon as I pulled back onto the road, the clicking sped up slightly, like it was matching the car's acceleration. I kept driving west, watching the fields on either side. More cows, same thing. Every single one of them facing north. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed lights in the distance, orange and faint, maybe a half mile ahead. At first, I thought it was a combine working late or a truck parked on the shoulder. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. The light was just hanging there above the field, not blinking, not flickering, just steady. The radio clicking slowed again. I rolled the window down. The air outside was dead quiet, no insects, no wind. The light was too bright to be a lantern, too dim to be headlights. It looked suspended, like it wasn't attached to anything. I slowed down but didn't stop this time. I passed within a few hundred feet of it, and it didn't move. Just hung there, about 20 feet above the ground, glowing orange like sodium light through fog. As I passed, the radio let out a sharp burst of static, loud enough to make me jump, then cut to total silence. No clicking, no sound at all. I drove another mile before I looked in the rearview mirror. The light was still there, same position, same brightness. I pulled over again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The second I stopped, the radio came back, clicking again, same slow rhythm. I looked at the fields on both sides. The cows this time were facing toward the road, every one of them. I don't know why, but that detail broke me. My skin went cold, and I got this overwhelming urge to leave. Not curiosity, just a deep sense that I shouldn't be there anymore. I hit the gas and didn't stop for 40 miles, not until I reached a small truck stop near Russell. I parked under the bright canopy lights and sat there, engine running. The clicking was gone. The radio worked fine. I turned it to a talk station and left it there, just to hear normal human voices again. When I went inside to grab coffee, I asked the cashier, a woman maybe in her 60s, if she'd ever heard weird radio interference out there. She looked at me kind of funny and said, sometimes the reception's bad near the wind farms, but that was about it. When I came back out, I could smell rain in the air again. I looked up. Clouds were thick and low. Just as I was about to get back in the car, a flicker of orange light flashed faintly across the fields to the east. Not lightning, just one soft pulse, like someone had switched on a light bulb behind a curtain and then off again. I drove straight through the rest of the night into Colorado. The radio never made another sound. 2 days later, my brother and I were driving back along that same stretch during the day. Clear skies, bright sun. We passed the same farmland, same herds. The cows were scattered randomly this time, grazing, moving normally. Nothing strange about them at all. I didn't mention it. But when we stopped for gas near the same area, I noticed something. On the hood of my car, thin streaks of dried residue, like faint gray dust. Not dirt, not pollen. When I brushed at it, it left a metallic smell on my fingers, like rust or burned wiring. That night, when I got back to my brother's place, I turned on the radio again out of habit. No clicking, no interference, just clean static between stations. But sometimes when I'm driving through flat country and hit a stretch with no cell signal, I still catch myself listening for that sound, the soft, steady tick, tick, tick underneath the noise. The train rattled along the tracks like it always did, the wheels clanging against the rails in that steady, hypnotic rhythm. I'd taken the night train from Albany to Syracuse a few times before, but this ride was different. Late March, freezing rain outside, the kind of wet, sharp cold that seeps through the seams of a coat. I had a window seat in the last car, alone, the aisle empty for the most part. Most people slept or stared out the window at the dark blur of trees and fields. I was halfway through a thermos of coffee, leaning back with my headphones on when it happened. 1 second, the world outside was black, streaked with rain and the reflection of the interior lights on the glass. The next, it was white, just completely, blindingly white. Not snow, not fog. It was like someone had dropped a sheet of pure light over the countryside. I sat up, heart thumping, and the train's interior didn't change. The fluorescent lights hummed the same, the other passengers still slumped over or asleep. I looked around the car. Everyone was completely oblivious, even the conductor down the aisle. I rubbed my eyes and blinked. The whiteness outside didn't move. It wasn't clouds or mist drifting. It stayed still, stretching for miles in both directions. I tried to see shapes, trees, fields, buildings, anything, but there was nothing. Just this uniform, glowing expanse. I tapped the window, half expecting the glass to distort the light somehow. Nothing. My reflection stared back at me, a pale face under the hood of my jacket. Then the train slowed ever so slightly, like it had hit a curve or a signal. I looked for the conductor and asked quietly, "Excuse me, what's going on outside? Are we delayed?" He paused, frowning. "No, sir. Everything's on schedule. No reports of any delays. Track's clear." He glanced down at the console and shrugged. "Just normal winter weather, I guess. Some patches of fog, maybe." Fog? That didn't make sense. I tried to describe it, but the words sounded ridiculous even as I spoke them. "It's white. Completely white. I can't see anything." He laughed softly, the kind of dismissive chuckle someone gives when a passenger is confused about a heavy rainstorm. "You're seeing reflections or light from the overheads. Happens sometimes at night with wet windows. Nothing to worry about." I swallowed, unsure if I should insist. Part of me wanted to go along with him. Part of me wanted to get up and look out at the other side, but the car was silent and still. Nobody else reacted. I leaned back against the seat, trying to keep it in perspective. Maybe it was some kind of lighting effect from the nearby town lights reflecting off the wet fields. But no, this whiteness didn't flicker. It didn't fade. It didn't change at all. I started trying to track the horizon. The train was moving, right? I should have seen movement, trees passing by, dark patches of land, streetlights, but the whiteness stayed flat and consistent. It wasn't just bright, it was uniform, almost physically smooth, like a blank canvas. I took out my phone, trying to take a photo. The screen lit up, camera app ready, but when I pointed it at the window, all I got was static. White fuzz, shifting slightly, but giving no detail. I tried again, same thing, no photo. I even tried recording video, switching the lens, closing the brightness, nothing. The phone didn't malfunction otherwise. It could take selfies, browse the internet, just the view outside. I tried to focus on the edges of the light. Was it clouds? Was there a light fog bank? But there was nothing to mark the horizon. No trees, no fences, no power lines. The whiteness stretched from the bottom of the window to the top and across the entire span. After a few minutes, I felt uneasy. The train slowed again, almost imperceptibly. The rhythmic rattle of the rails felt louder now, more insistent. I glanced around. Everyone else slept or stared off into nothing, unaware. I considered going to the next car. Maybe someone there had noticed it. But as I started to get up, the light shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but it drifted closer, like a fog creeping toward the train. My stomach tightened. I froze, half expecting someone to notice it behind me. Nobody did. I sat back down, trying to think rationally. I pressed my forehead to the window and whispered, "Okay, what is this?" The light didn't answer, obviously, but I swear it changed then. Not in brightness, not in size, but in weight. It felt like it pressed against me, like the air around the train had a denser quality, heavier, almost warm. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. A shadow flickered across the whiteness for a second. I thought maybe it was a cloud, a branch, a distant barn, but it was just a vague line, smooth and geometric, like the edge of something not quite natural. Then it vanished. I tried talking to the conductor again, lower this time. Are you sure the tracks are clear? Anything unusual? He glanced back at me like I was panicking. Clear as far as I can tell. All signals green. No reports from dispatch. We're on schedule. You should rest. It's a long ride. I wanted to leave the car, get someone to check the windows outside, but every instinct in me said to stay seated. Minutes passed. The train kept moving, but the light never faded. Eventually, I started timing it in my head. Maybe 15, 20 minutes? I didn't have a clock in the car, just the soft glow of the cabin lights. But when I finally looked at my phone, it read 1:12 a.m., the same as when I first noticed it. Not minutes later, not hours. Just frozen. I tried speaking again, this time narrating everything I saw into my phone's voice recorder. White light, no shapes, still moving, drifting slowly, passengers asleep, conductor swears nothing unusual. When I played it back later, the recording was fine. My voice sounded normal, no other sounds. Then, gradually, the light started fading. Not dimming, not slowly melting. It just disappeared, like someone pulled a curtain. I leaned against the window, expecting to see trees, fields, maybe a farmhouse or a barn. Nothing. Total darkness. Just the usual black streak of the night outside. I rubbed my eyes, looked at the other passengers, still asleep. The conductor looked at me once more, curious, then turned back to the controls. I asked him one last time when we stopped at Syracuse, trying to see if anyone else had reported anything. He shook his head. Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. Smooth ride, on time, nothing unusual recorded. I left the train that night feeling disoriented. The streets were wet, faintly reflecting the sparse streetlights, and the air smelled of rain and diesel. I walked to my car, replaying every moment. The whiteness, the drifting shadows, the way the air had felt heavier. Weeks later, I checked the railroad logs. There was nothing. Not a note, not a delay, not an anomaly of any kind. I've ridden that line again since, at night and in the day. Nothing like that ever happened again. But sometimes, when the wind is damp and the sky low, I swear I can remember the way the air felt pressed against the windows of that train car, and I can see that whiteness stretching endlessly outside, smooth, bright, and impossibly still. I was walking my dog behind the house when I first saw it. The trail back there cuts through about 100 yards of woods before looping around a little creek and coming back out near the neighbor's barn. It was close to 9, maybe a little after. Early spring, damp air, a few mosquitoes still hanging around even though it was cool. I had a flashlight, but barely used it because the moon was bright enough to see the path. My dog, Riley, is usually all over the place out there, sniffing, running ahead, doubling back. That night, she stuck closer than usual right at my knee. I noticed it because she kept glancing at the trees, kind of uneasy. I figured there were deer out. We see them all the time. I heard a rustle to the left and clicked the flashlight that way, but nothing moved. That's when I noticed this faint green light between the trees. At first, I thought it was someone's yard light bleeding through the woods, but it was too low, barely a few feet off the ground. It didn't flash or blink like a firefly. It just drifted, slow and smooth, maybe 30 yards away. I stopped walking and Riley froze with me. The light didn't seem to be attached to anything. There wasn't a beam or a shadow, just this little glowing ball moving horizontally through the trees. I pulled out my phone to record it. The moment I opened the camera app, the screen glitched. A line of static across the middle, then just gray fuzz like an old TV. I thought maybe it was my flashlight interfering, so I shut it off, but the screen stayed scrambled. The second I did that, the green light stopped moving. It hovered there, perfectly still. That got my attention. I said something out loud, hello, not even sure why. It didn't answer or change, but a second later it started drifting again, this time in my direction. The weird part was how smooth it moved. No bouncing, no flicker, just a slow, steady glide, weaving between trunks like it was on rails. My first thought was a drone, but there wasn't any sound. The woods were dead quiet except for the creek somewhere ahead. Riley started whining. That was enough for me. I turned back toward the house, keeping an eye on it over my shoulder. It followed, not fast, not directly at me, but it was coming the same way, maybe 50 feet back. When I broke out of the trees into the field behind my place, I finally felt like I could breathe. I turned around, expecting it to disappear behind the branches, but it came out too. The same pale green light, just brighter now against the open field. I walked faster. About halfway to the house, I tried to record again. The phone still wouldn't work. No service, no flashlight, no camera. Even the screen brightness slider froze. I remember feeling this weird warmth in my hand holding the phone. Not hot exactly, just uncomfortable. The closer I got to the house, the slower the light moved, until it stopped again near the edge of the woods. I stood there watching it for maybe a full minute. Then it blinked out, not faded, not dimmed, just gone, like someone flipped a switch. I stayed outside another few minutes, waiting to see if it would come back. Nothing. Eventually I went in, locked the door, and let Riley crash on the floor by my bed. That might have been the end of it, but around midnight I woke up to the sound of something tapping on the window. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I live on the 2nd floor. There's no porch roof or tree branch anywhere near that side of the house. Riley started growling, the low kind she does when she hears something she doesn't like. I didn't move. The tapping stopped after maybe 10 seconds. The next morning I checked outside. No ladder, no footprints under the window, just damp grass from the dew. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of bird, but I don't think birds peck 3 times in perfect rhythm and then wait to do it again. That afternoon, I walked back to the woods to see if I could find anything. The air smelled a little like ozone, that burnt metallic scent you get after lightning, even though it hadn't stormed. In the dirt, right where the light had stopped, there was a patch of ground maybe 3 feet wide where the grass looked flattened and slightly gray. The soil underneath was dry, almost powdery. I touched it. It was warm. Not hot, just oddly warm compared to the rest of the ground. That evening, I showed my friend Marcus the spot. He lives up the road and works nights, so he came by after dinner. He didn't say much, just kind of stared at it and shrugged. He joked that I'd found a UFO landing pad. I laughed, but I could tell he felt weird about it too. When the sun went down, we stood in the yard for a while, facing the tree line. Nothing showed up. No lights, no sounds. He left around 10. I stayed out another half hour, just listening. Right before I went in, I heard that same rustling again from the same spot. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sound of fabric brushing branches. I called out again, "Who's there?" But the woods went silent. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me sit up. Around 2 in the morning, the power went out for maybe 10 seconds. Long enough for every appliance to reset, for the room to go pitch black. When the lights came back, Riley was standing at the window, whining again. I looked outside and saw the faintest green glow in the distance, way farther back this time, beyond the creek, just hovering low above the trees. I didn't move until it faded completely. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The patch of dead grass was still there, but the smell was gone. My phone worked fine again too, except for one thing. The last few photos in my camera roll were corrupted. All just gray rectangles. I didn't go back to the woods for a few days. When I finally did, the patch had grown a little, like something had scorched the ground in a wider circle. Still warm to the touch, still bone dry. I brought a shovel and tried to dig into it, but the soil under the top layer was hard, almost like clay. Later that week, I talked to Mrs. Klein, the woman who owns the farm across the creek. I asked her if she'd seen any lights lately. She said she saw something green out her kitchen window 2 nights before, floating low across the field before vanishing behind the trees. She thought it was a flare. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. That night I sat out on the porch with the lights off, just watching the tree line. Nothing happened for hours. Around midnight, the cicadas all stopped at once. Dead silence. Then, maybe a minute later, a single flash of green, bright, quick, like lightning without sound, lit up the woods. The sound came after, a low, heavy thump, like someone dropping a refrigerator in the dirt. Riley barked once and bolted inside. I didn't go looking. I just sat there until the noises started again, until it felt like the night went back to normal. I've tried a few more times since then to film out there, but every time I get close, the camera glitches. The green light hasn't come back to the yard, but sometimes when the air's heavy and the wind dies down, I catch the faint smell of ozone again, drifting through the woods. I've stopped walking that trail after dark. Riley won't go near it anyway. She just stands at the edge of the grass, staring into the trees, tail low, ears pinned back, waiting, like she's listening for something. Sometimes when I'm out there at dusk, I get the feeling something's watching from the other side of the creek. Not a person, not an animal, just the sense of being seen. And when I look too long, I swear I catch a dim, flickering green far between the trunks, hovering in place, as if it's waiting for me to take one more step closer. I woke to the ceiling, trembling. At first, I thought it was the house settling. The old frame of my townhouse does that sometimes during cold nights, but this felt different. The vibration was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but consistent, like a low hum I could feel in my chest as much as here. I opened my eyes, and the room was dark. No street lights piercing through the blinds, nothing. I rolled onto my side and stared at the ceiling. It didn't flicker or crack, nothing. The sensation persisted, a quiet shudder that made the air feel heavier. I tried to tell myself it was just me waking up in an unfamiliar state. Maybe half asleep hallucinations or the kind of tingling nerves you get after too much caffeine, but I couldn't shake the sense that something outside was connected to it. I got up and crept to the window. My apartment overlooks the park behind the building. Normally I'd see a scattering of stars or the occasional plane, but that night the sky was black, unbroken. No stars, no moon, just a solid dark canvas. Then I saw it. At first, it was a dim glow, like a faint patch of light behind the clouds. Then the shape resolved itself into something enormous, low-hanging over the park, moving slowly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't bright enough to cast shadows, but its presence muted the darkness, like the color of night itself had been thickened around it. I froze, pressed my palm against the cool glass. The vibration in the ceiling seemed to sync with the movement of this shape, subtle, almost rhythmic. It wasn't a plane, a balloon, or a blimp. I know the city sky. I'd lived here for 8 years. Nothing in that shape's size or motion matched any aircraft I've ever seen. I reached for my phone, trying to get some light or a photo. The screen lit up, but when I pointed it at the sky, it displayed a strange gray wash, like a fogged lens, and the shape didn't appear at all. I tried recording video, taking pictures, adjusting exposure, nothing worked. The phone worked normally otherwise. Texts, calls, notifications, all fine. Just the view outside. I texted my roommate Luke, hoping maybe he'd wake up and see it too. No response. I tried calling. His phone rang through like normal, but no answer. I walked around the apartment, checking all windows facing the park. The shape stayed overhead, silent, drifting slightly as if it were floating just above the treetops, following the contours of the park. The hum in the ceiling persisted. When I leaned against the wall, I realized the vibration extended through the floor too. Not loud, just subtle. Something radiating, almost like a giant tuning fork somewhere beyond the building. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, trying to figure out what I was seeing. It didn't feel threatening, exactly, just deliberate. It moved slowly, with intention, tracing the park in a way that made no sense for a natural phenomenon. After 10 or 15 minutes, I noticed something else. The streetlights below the building, normally casting harsh yellow beams, seemed dimmer. Not all of them, just the ones directly beneath the shape. It was subtle, like a shadow had fallen over them, but I could see it if I focused. I thought about calling 911 or someone local, but how could I explain it? Hi, there's a giant dim shape drifting over my park, and my ceiling is vibrating. I didn't want to sound crazy. I got back to the window and stared. It drifted a little closer, maybe 50 feet, then paused. The outline was hard to define. No sharp edges, just a vague, enormous oval. It wasn't reflective, it didn't shine or blink. It was like a smudge of dim light hovering in the black. After another 20 minutes, I heard a faint rustle from the hall. My cat Scout had been sleeping in the bedroom. She darted under the bed, her fur standing on end. I crouched, trying to call her out, but she stayed put, growling low. I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't alone in sensing this. The vibration in the ceiling shifted, subtle but noticeable, slightly stronger, then weaker again. I pressed my hand flat against it, trying to measure it. My mind started racing with ridiculous ideas. Construction equipment, some military test, a weather balloon, a prank. None of them fit. It was too silent, too steady, too controlled. I noticed something else then. From the corner of my eye, through the blinds, a faint greenish tint seemed to appear at the edge of the shape. Not bright, not solid, more like a reflection or a sheen. I blinked and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Still nothing. The shape shifted again, moving horizontally now, tracing the tree line. The vibration in the ceiling stayed, like it was linked, pulsing lightly in response. I felt trapped in that room, unable to leave and unable to fully watch. Every instinct screamed that I should run outside, but I also felt a pull. I wanted to see it closer, understand it. Time started to lose meaning. The hum, the vibration, the silence outside, it all became a single, heavy experience. I didn't check the clock. I didn't check my phone for notifications. The apartment felt suspended, as if reality had thinned. After nearly an hour, I noticed the shape rising slowly, drifting backward over the park. I mean, slowly, barely perceptible unless you focused on it. The vibration in the ceiling faded gradually, the air seemed lighter. I watched until the glow disappeared into the distant black of the night sky. I didn't move for another 10 minutes. Scout finally crawled out from under the bed, brushing against my legs. I sat on the floor and just let her purr, trying to ground myself. By the time I went to bed again, the city was quiet. The sky was dark, starless, but normal now. The streetlights were back to full brightness. Nothing out of place. My phone worked fine, and I eventually got a text from Luke. Sleeping through the storm, he had no idea what I'd been seeing. The next morning, everything seemed ordinary. The park looked normal from my window, no signs of anything unusual. I went to work, tried to act normal, but I kept glancing at the sky when I walked outside. I kept expecting to see that dim, drifting shape. It hasn't appeared since. The vibrations haven't returned. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind dies down and the apartment is quiet, I swear I feel a subtle hum again, just under the surface, like something vast and silent is watching from somewhere overhead. And every time I look at the sky, I remember that one black night, the way the air felt heavy and the ceiling shivered, and I can still picture that enormous dim glow drifting silently above the city. I was driving home from Denver that night, taking the back roads through Jefferson County because I wanted to avoid the traffic on I-70. It was early March, cold enough that the patches of snow along the roadside hadn't melted yet, but clear skies, no wind, and a quiet night. I had the heat on and the radio playing low, some old classic rock station that I barely listen to anymore. I was maybe 20 minutes outside of Golden, heading west on State Highway 93. The road is narrow and winding there, flanked by pines and occasional houses set back from the shoulder. I was half dozing in the warmth of the car, staring at the dark road ahead when I noticed a bright light sitting right in the middle of my lane. At first, I thought it had to be a car, maybe someone parked badly, headlights off, but there was no reflection off the pavement, no body shape, nothing. Just this intense, bright white light hovering maybe 4 feet off the asphalt. My first instinct was to slow down. I tapped the brakes gently, keeping a safe distance. The light stayed in place, stationary, like it was waiting. I squinted, trying to make out edges, but it was just a solid, almost glowing blob. Not flickering, not pulsing, just bright. I thought maybe I'd hit ice or some optical effect on the wet road, but the pavement was dry and the air was crisp and clear. Then, as I slowed almost to a stop, the light moved. Not sideways, not like rolling across the ground. It lifted, smooth, like it was buoyant in the air, maybe a foot at a time at first, then suddenly it was overhead, passing right above my car. I could see the underside, sort of rounded, with a hard white glow that wasn't a reflection. It seemed like the light was coming from the object itself. It made no noise. No engine, no hum, no wind. My car windows were up, and I would have noticed even a light breeze, but there was nothing. The radio stayed on, no static. I felt my stomach tighten, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My mind raced. Helicopter, drone, plane, none fit. The shape didn't have blades, wings, or any recognizable structure. Just a smooth, bright form gliding over the road. I didn't swerve, I didn't even move my foot off the brake. I just watched it pass. It was over the roof, over the hood, and then it vanished. Not shooting off at speed, not fading slowly. It simply disappeared, like someone had erased it. I blinked. The darkness returned. The trees, the road, the stars, all normal. No residual light. My car's headlights swept over the asphalt. Nothing. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me either. I tried calling my brother, Matt, thinking maybe he could make sense of it. Phone rang. No answer. I even texted him, "Dude, weird thing just flew over my car. Not kidding." I got no reply for almost an hour. I started driving again, slowly, my mind running through possibilities. I kept expecting to see something. Another light, movement, reflection. Nothing. Just the same quiet road, snow patches glowing dimly under my headlights. About 5 minutes later, I noticed movement on the roadside. I thought it might be deer. The area is full of them, but what I saw didn't look right. A figure, tall, thin, standing upright in the shadow of a tree line, motionless. I slowed instinctively, watching it. No eyes reflected light, no sudden movement, nothing. I kept driving, watching it through the windshield. It didn't follow me, it didn't move when I drove past. It just waited. I told myself it was probably a person, or maybe just a trick of shadows. I even laughed at myself out loud, though my voice sounded hollow in the car. I kept driving, faster now, wanting to get to a more populated stretch of road. The rest of the drive was normal. No lights, no strange objects, no shadows standing at the tree line. By the time I hit the highway near Golden, I had my wits about me again, but my chest still felt tight, like adrenaline was lingering. I got home around 11:15 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet, no cars on the street. I sat in the driveway for a while, just staring at the sky. Stars were clear, no glow, no movement, nothing unusual. I thought about calling someone. The police, maybe a friend, but what would I even say? Some bright thing hovered over my car and disappeared? It sounded insane. I checked the news the next morning. Nothing about lights in the area, no helicopter tests, no weather anomalies reported. The local Facebook groups had the usual posts about snow, traffic, and construction, but nothing unusual. That afternoon, I told Matt about it. He laughed at first. "Probably a drone, dude. People fly those things at night." I shook my head. Not a drone. Too big, too bright. And it vanished, like disappeared. Not just flew off, gone. He frowned but dropped it. Even he knew there wasn't a way to prove it. The weirdest part? The vibration I thought I felt in my chest while watching it pass lingered for hours afterward. Driving to work the next day, I kept thinking I saw a glow in the corner of my eye, in the clouds or over a building, but every time I checked, it was just normal sky. I haven't driven that stretch of 93 alone at night since. I stick to I-70 now, even if it takes longer. I haven't seen anything like that light again, and I haven't had any close experiences, but I still notice reflections, small glows, shadows out of place, nothing consistent, nothing solid, but enough to make my stomach tighten in the quiet moments when I'm driving alone. Sometimes I try to tell myself it was a hallucination, maybe stress or fatigue, but the way it moved, the weight of it passing directly over me, it was real. I remember exactly how the air felt when it was above the car. Heavy, almost static, as if the world had paused just for that moment. I keep thinking about it when I drive at night now, about the way it lifted smoothly, without sound, without turbulence, about how ordinary everything else on that road felt before and after. That's what unsettles me most. The way something completely unexplainable can just pass through a normal night and leave nothing behind. We were camping near Black Hollow Ridge, out past Rifle, Colorado. Just 3 of us. Me, Nate, and Jordan. It was early September, the kind of weekend where the days were still hot, but the nights dropped into the low 40s. We'd gone up there to fish the creek and just get away from work for a few days. Nothing fancy, just tents, a cooler, and a fire pit we'd dug ourselves. It was our second night. The first had gone smoothly. Beers, a small fire, coyotes somewhere far off, that kind of thing. But the second night, the wind came in earlier. Around 8 p.m., it started kicking up enough that the trees swayed and we had to sit closer to the fire to keep warm. The sky was completely clear though. No moon, no clouds, just thousands of stars you never see from town. I remember Nate was trying to make chili over the camp stove, and Jordan was walking back from the truck with another six-pack when I noticed the first light. It was red, faint at first, way above the ridge to the west. I pointed it out without thinking. "Is that a plane?" I asked. Jordan stopped and squinted. "Too low for a plane." We all watched for a second. The light wasn't moving, not up, not sideways, just hovering there, completely still. It pulsed a little, but not like a strobe, more like it was breathing. Then a second one appeared a few hundred feet to the right of it. At first, we assumed they were maybe tower lights or something on a distant structure, but there weren't any towers out there. We'd hiked that ridge earlier that day. It was nothing but scrub pine and sandstone. Then came the third light, appearing to the left of the first one. All three lined up in a perfect horizontal line, evenly spaced. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but it was too dark. The camera just showed blackness with faint pinpoints that didn't look like anything. I tried zooming in, but that made it worse. "Probably drones," Nate said after a while. He was trying to sound confident, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The lights were too steady. No noise, no drift. We listened hard, not even a hum, just wind and the crackle of the fire. We watched them for maybe 10 minutes. They didn't move at all. No flicker, no descent, no flash. Just 3 blood-red points against the stars. Then suddenly they shifted. It happened fast, but not instant. A smooth, fluid motion like they were connected somehow. The middle light dropped slightly while the outer two rose, forming a perfect triangle. We didn't speak at first. I remember the air going still, like the wind had just cut off. Jordan finally muttered, "What the hell?" I didn't answer. None of us moved. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. The triangle hovered there, totally motionless again. Then one of the lights, the one at the top, flickered brighter for a split second. It was subtle, but it was enough to make me think it was signaling something. Nate took a step back from the fire. "Okay, that's not drones," he said quietly. "No way they can hold formation like that in wind." I checked my phone again. No signal. We were in a dead zone, same as the night before. I tried recording anyway, but when I looked at the screen, the lights didn't appear. The lens just showed faint static, like the pixels couldn't decide what to do. The lights didn't move for a long time, probably another 5 minutes, and then, just like that, they started to rise. All three lifted together, perfectly synchronized, climbing slow but steady. The triangle stayed intact the whole time. We followed them until they were so high we had to crane our necks back. Then, without warning, the top light blinked out. Then the one to the right, then the last. Each one went dark in order, a few seconds apart. The sky went back to normal. Stars, silence, nothing else. We didn't talk for a while. I don't even think we were breathing right. After a few minutes, Jordan said, "Could it have been flares?" "No," Nate said immediately. "Flares drift. They flicker. They drop." He pointed at the ridge. Those didn't move. We ended up staying up way later than planned, keeping the fire going, half because it was cold, half because none of us wanted to crawl into our tents. Every sound in the woods made me jump, snapping branches at the occasional rustle in the grass. It felt like the air had a weight to it after that. Around midnight, the wind picked up again. The tent flaps flapped like flags and the trees creaked. I thought I saw another faint right through the trees, but it was hard to tell if it was real or just my eyes adjusting. I didn't mention it. We didn't see anything else that night. The next morning, we all acted normal, but you could tell we were off. Nate packed faster than usual. Jordan didn't say much. When we drove down the dirt road back toward town, we stopped at a diner in Rifle for breakfast. There was an older couple sitting near us, locals by the sound of it. They were talking about strange lights over the ridge last night. We froze. Jordan asked them what they'd seen. The guy shrugged and said, "Just 3 red ones. Thought it was flares, but they didn't move right. My wife saw them too. They said it had been around 9 o'clock, same time we'd seen them. That shut us up pretty quick. None of us wanted to talk about it anymore after that. We went home that afternoon. I dropped Nate off at his apartment, then Jordan at his place outside Glenwood Springs. I got back to my apartment that night and tried to look up anything about it. Meteor reports, military tests, anything. Nothing. A week later, Nate texted me a photo he'd taken of the ridge that afternoon from a distance. Perfectly normal. No towers, no antennas, no aircraft beacons, just rock and trees. He joked that we should go back out there sometime, but I could tell he wasn't serious. Neither was I. Sometimes when I think about it, I try to remember exactly how those lights moved, the precision of it, the way they held in that perfect triangle like something mechanical but not human. I can still picture how the air felt, dry and cold and dead quiet, and the way the fire's smoke seemed to hang lower while we watched. We never saw anything like it again. But I've driven past that ridge a few times since during the day, and every time without meaning to, I glance up at that same stretch of sky, half expecting to see three faint red lights lined up waiting. I first noticed the shadow on a Wednesday morning. I was getting ready for work, half awake, waiting for my coffee to finish brewing, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the Ring app. Motion detected, backyard camera. That wasn't unusual. I live outside of Bend, Oregon, and the camera sometimes catches raccoons or deer wandering through at night. But when I opened the clip, something about it made me stop pouring my coffee. It was around 3:12 a.m. The camera showed the usual stuff. My back fence, the patchy grass, the old picnic table I keep meaning to replace. There's a faint security light on the shed, so it's never completely dark back there. But a few seconds in, the light dimmed slightly, like something passed in front of it. Not a total blackout, just a subtle fade, like a shadow moving over the camera lens. I thought it might be an insect or something close to the camera, but it didn't look right. The shadow wasn't small or quick. It was large, slow, and broad. It drifted across the middle of the yard from left to right. But here's what caught me. There was no light source to cast it. No car headlights, no moonbeam, nothing that could have created a shadow that distinct. I rewound the clip a few times, squinting at my phone. You can even see the wind blowing the trees in one direction, southwest, but the shadow moved the opposite way, like it ignored the wind entirely. It only lasted about 4 seconds. Then the light on the shed brightened again, like normal. I don't know why, but it unsettled me. The camera's pretty high quality, and I've watched enough clips to know what raccoons, coyotes, and even stray cats look like when they trip the motion sensor. This wasn't any of those. It had no shape I could define. Not human, not animal. Just a darkness that moved. That day at work, I mentioned it to one of my coworkers, Adam. He joked about paranormal stuff and told me I probably caught fog or a bat flying close to the lens. I didn't argue, but the clip didn't look like that. There wasn't any blur, and the light didn't flicker the way it usually does when something flies near it. That night, I checked the camera again before going to bed. Nothing new. But around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, a weird, restless feeling. My room was dim, moonlight spilling through the blinds. I listened for a minute. Everything was quiet. I thought about checking the live camera feed, but decided against it. I lay there a few minutes before falling back asleep. The next morning, another notification, motion detected at 3:13 a.m. I opened it immediately. Same angle, same faint glow from the shed light. About 5 seconds into the clip, the shadow appeared again. Same direction, left to right, same speed. Only this time, the camera glitched slightly when it passed. The picture pixelated, then corrected itself, and for maybe half a second, the timestamp froze. I played it back several times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The timestamp stopped at 3:37, then jumped to 3:10. 3 seconds missing. That detail got under my skin. I know these cameras can lag or drop frames, but it was too coincidental. The same time of night, same direction, and now this weird skip. By the third night, I couldn't help myself. I stayed up. I kept the back door light off, made a pot of coffee, and sat by the window facing the yard. Around 2:45, I opened the live feed on my laptop just to compare it with what I was seeing in real time. The yard looked perfectly normal, motionless except for the branches swaying gently. Then, just after 3:10, the live feed stuttered. The video hiccuped like buffering on a bad connection, except my Wi-Fi was fine. I checked the real window, nothing. The yard looked empty. At 3:12 exactly, the camera glitched again. The light from the shed dimmed, just slightly, and my stomach tightened. I couldn't see any movement from where I sat, but on the laptop screen, something darker was crossing the yard. It wasn't a figure, more like a patch of blackness sliding across the grass, erasing what it touched. My heart started pounding. I looked from the window to the screen again, trying to see if it matched, but through the glass, the yard was just normal darkness. The light outside didn't flicker at all. When the shape reached the far side of the yard on the feed, the camera froze completely. Then it cut to black. I stared at it for a minute, not sure what to do. After about 10 seconds, the feed came back and everything looked normal again. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked the saved clip. The timestamp showed 3:12:2 to 3:12:15, then jumped ahead to 3:14. 2 minutes gone this time. The gap wasn't just dropped frames, it was like the recording stopped altogether. I started noticing other strange things over the next few days. The motion notifications would come at odd times, sometimes at 2:57, sometimes 3:19. But when I'd check the recordings, there'd be nothing in them. Just the faint hum of wind or crickets, with no visible movement. One morning, I went out to check the camera itself, thinking maybe a branch was interfering with it or moisture got inside. The camera looked fine, but when I stepped into the middle of the yard, I noticed a faint patch of dead grass, a long oval shape, maybe 10 feet across. The ground felt slightly warmer under my shoes. Not hot, but not as cold as the surrounding frost. I stood there for a while, listening. It was completely still. No birds, no wind, just a heavy, dull quiet that made the back of my neck prickle. That same afternoon, I called my neighbor, Janet, who lives on the other side of the fence. I asked if she'd noticed anything weird lately. Lights, noises, animals acting strange. She paused for a second, then said, "Now that you mention it, my dog's been barking at the fence every night around 3. Nothing there when I check, though." I didn't tell her about the shadow. That night, I set the camera to record continuously instead of motion triggered. Around 3:10 a.m., I was half asleep on the couch with the TV on mute when the light from the backyard flickered faintly through the blinds. Just one quick dimming, like a power surge. I didn't move, I just stared at the blinds, holding my breath. Then came a sound. Not loud, more like a low, muffled hum, almost like wind passing through a pipe, but steadier. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. When I checked the footage the next morning, the hum was there, faint but clear. The shed light dimmed again at 3:12:04, and that same dark mass glided across the frame. But this time, something else happened. The edges of the trees in the background seemed to bend slightly inward as it passed, like the air around it warped. The clip ended at 3:14 again. I saved it to my laptop, but when I tried to send it to Adam later that day, the file corrupted. It wouldn't play at all. I tried re-downloading from the cloud, but the version on the app was gone. The thumbnail there just showed a gray square. I haven't gotten a motion alert since that night. The patch of dead grass in the yard hasn't grown back, even though the rest of it has. And every once in a while, when I sit outside after dark, I get that same stillness, that heavy, unnatural quiet where it feels like even the air is holding its breath. I keep the camera pointed the same way, but I stopped checking the footage. I don't delete it, but I don't open the app anymore either. Some nights I'll wake up and see the faint blue light on the camera reflecting through the window blinds, steady and unblinking. I tell myself it's recording nothing but wind. I still make coffee every morning around the same time. Sometimes I glance at the clock and see 3:12 glowing back at me, and I just look away. I set up camp late that evening on a ridge trail in the Cascade Mountains, not far from Leavenworth, Washington. It was early October, and the air had that damp, crisp feel, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones after the sun goes down. I'd been hiking all day, carrying a light pack and a small tent, planning to spend the night alone before heading back to town in the morning. I remember it got dark fast. The sun had disappeared behind the peaks by 6:15, leaving a gray twilight that turned almost black by 7. I pitched my tent on a small patch of flat ground near a stand of firs, close enough to the trail for orientation, but far enough to feel isolated. My firewood was damp, so I skipped a fire and just used a headlamp to boil water for dinner. Around 10:30, I crawled into the tent with my sleeping bag. The trailhead was miles away, and the silence around me was absolute except for the occasional wind through the trees. I set my headlamp on low inside the tent and started reading, trying to settle after the long day. That's when I noticed it. A faint, steady whirring sound coming from above. Not loud, but definite. A kind of mechanical hum, almost like a ceiling fan running somewhere far away. At first, I figured it was my imagination, or maybe a distant helicopter. But the sound had a strange rhythm, consistent and low-pitched, and it didn't match any natural sound I've ever heard in the mountains. I unzipped the tent flap slowly and peered out. The night was deep black, but there was a pale, white light hovering just beyond the tree line. It was hard to judge distance, but it looked like maybe 50 feet away. It didn't flicker like a flashlight or beam from a car. It just glowed softly, a constant, diffuse light. I froze. The light didn't move in any natural way, no swaying with the wind, no descent from the trees. It just hovered there, silent apart from the whirring above. I thought about calling out, but I didn't. My voice sounded fragile in that quiet, and I didn't want to draw attention. I watched for a few minutes, every muscle tense, and then, without warning, it vanished. Not faded, not moved behind a tree, just gone. The tree line looked untouched, ordinary, like it had never been there. The whirring stopped at the same moment. I sat back, confused, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a drone? But the nearest town is miles away, and even if someone had a drone, it would have made a different sound, and the light would have changed angles when it moved. No, this was different. I couldn't explain it. I lay back down, heart still racing, and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. I went over it in my head. The hum, the steady glow, the complete disappearance. Everything about it felt precise and deliberate, but there was no logic I could pin it to. I didn't sleep well. Every time I dozed off, I imagined the light returning, hovering just at the edge of the firs. Around 1 a.m., I thought I heard something shifting outside the tent. Not a footstep, more like a subtle displacement of air. My heart jumped, but when I poked my head out, nothing. Just the shadowed shapes of trees in the moonlight. By 3 a.m., I'd started hearing the whirring again, but it was faint, intermittent, almost teasing. I unzipped the flap again, scanning the trees. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of pale light in the same spot as before, but the moment I blinked, it was gone. No glow, no sound, just the empty forest. I stayed in the tent, straining to hear anything, but the rest of the night was silent. When morning came, the sun rose in clear skies, and I packed up slowly, glancing back toward the tree line multiple times. Nothing looked different, no trace of the light or the sound. The forest seemed ordinary, almost mundane, with birds calling and a squirrel darting along a branch. As I hiked back down the trail, I tried to make sense of it. A reflection from a plane? No, the altitude and angle wouldn't line up, and it was stationary. A drone? Again, the sound and movement didn't match anything mechanical I've ever encountered. Electrical interference? Nothing in my pack could create a hovering light like that. For the rest of the day, I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting the hum or the glow to return. It didn't. I told myself it was a one-time thing, some strange atmospheric quirk, but I knew that explanation didn't satisfy me. I'd experienced enough nights in the mountains to know what's normal. This wasn't it. I thought about it on the drive back to town. Even with people around, the memory made me tense. I kept imagining the light, the whirring, the way it vanished without trace. Every logical explanation felt inadequate, and I realized I was left with a simple, unsettling fact. Something had been there, and I had no idea what it was. That evening, back in my apartment, I tried to distract myself with chores and television. But when I closed my eyes, I could still picture the pale glow hovering in the dark, just beyond the tree line. I couldn't hear the hum anymore, but the memory of it was vivid, almost tangible. A week later, I went camping again, this time with a friend. We stuck to popular trails and stayed in well-used campgrounds. No lights, no whirring, no unexplained phenomena. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd seen on that ridge was deliberate, not random, not natural, and not something I could categorize. Sometimes, even now, I replay the memory in my head. I wonder if it was something observing me or if it was a trick of the forest and night air. I don't know. I'll probably never know. I still go camping alone occasionally, but I never set up on that ridge again. The memory of that night lingers. Quiet, pale, hovering just beyond the edge of what I can see. I live alone in a small apartment above a pizza place in Bloomington, Indiana. It's nothing fancy. One bedroom, creaky floors, thin walls, and a constant smell of dough and fryer oil from downstairs. I'd been there about a year when this happened. It started on a Wednesday. I'd gone to bed around midnight after scrolling through my phone for too long. I remember setting it on my nightstand, face down, and plugging it in. The charger cord is short, so it always sits in the same spot, screen facing the wall. I usually sleep through the night, no problem. The next morning, I noticed a new video saved on my camera roll. 30 seconds long, time-stamped 2:41 a.m. That caught my attention right away because I hadn't filmed anything, obviously. I figured it was some glitch. Maybe I'd hit the record button somehow before bed. But when I opened it, it didn't make sense. The video starts in total darkness, then after a few seconds, there's this faint, shifting light in the corner of the frame. It's not a steady light, more like a glow, pale and colorless, almost like the reflection of headlights through fog. But it's moving. It drifts slowly across my room, from the far wall toward the door, never touching anything. No shadows, no edges, just this hazy shimmer. I thought maybe it was from a car outside, but live on a side street with no traffic that late, and the window faces an alley. The blinds were closed too. What unsettled me most wasn't the light itself, but the sound. You can hear faint rustling, like fabric shifting or someone brushing against the carpet. I listened to it over and over, trying to decide if it was just my blanket moving in the dark. But the sound wasn't close to the mic. It was distant, across the room. About 20 seconds in, the glow gets brighter, then dims, like it pulses once. Then it slides out of frame toward the corner by the door and vanishes. The last 5 seconds are just black. I watched it maybe 10 times before I realized something else. The camera wasn't facing where I left it. My phone had been on the nightstand, angled toward the wall. The video was filmed from the foot of my bed, facing the door. I just stared at the screen, trying to piece that together. How would it have moved? I sleep light. The sound of a text wakes me up. There's no way someone came in and repositioned my phone without me knowing. I checked the lock, still latched, checked the window, closed. Everything was normal, just how I left it. That whole day at work, I couldn't focus. Every time I thought about the video, my stomach tightened. I told myself I'd set up a camera or something that night, but when it came time for bed, I didn't. I couldn't explain why, but the idea of deliberately filming whatever that was made my skin crawl. Still, I left my phone on the nightstand again, face down. I kept the light on low in the hallway, just enough to see shapes in the dark. I fell asleep sometime after 1 a.m. At 2:50, I woke up for no reason. Dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick. I remember lying there, eyes open, not sure what had woken me. My apartment's small. If someone had come in, I would have heard footsteps or the door latch, but there was nothing. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, I felt something faint, like a static charge in the air. It's hard to describe. Not cold, not warm, just a pressure, like the atmosphere had shifted slightly. My ears popped, and I remember thinking of thunderstorms, how the air gets heavy before lightning, and then that low, humming sound started. It wasn't loud, more like a soft vibration, steady, mechanical, but distant. Not coming from the walls or floor, it felt like it was in the air itself, just barely audible. I froze, trying to locate it. The sound stayed perfectly constant, no rhythm or pitch change, like a tone that existed for no reason. I reached over and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up, 2:54. I hit the camera app and switched to video, aiming toward the door. Nothing showed up at first, just the dark outline of my room. The sound stopped. After a few seconds, I lowered the phone and sat there, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep until dawn. In the morning, no new videos. No weird photos, no signs of anything. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe the fridge compressor humming through the floor. But that didn't explain the light in the first video, or how the phone had moved. A few days passed without anything else happening. I stopped checking my camera roll obsessively and started sleeping normally again. Then the following Tuesday, I woke up and saw a new 27-second video in my gallery. Same timestamp pattern, 2:42 a.m. This time, I hesitated before opening it. I knew I hadn't touched my phone in my sleep. I just stared at the thumbnail, a dark blur with a faint white line running through it. My hands were shaking before I even hit play. The first few seconds were identical: darkness, faint rustling. Then that same glow appeared, but this time closer, maybe 3 feet from the camera. It hovered there, motionless. I could see more of it now. It wasn't round, it had an uneven edge, like smoke contained in a shape, drifting slightly, but never dissipating. And the weirdest thing was how it didn't illuminate anything else. The room stayed dark, even though it was bright enough that I should have seen outlines of furniture. Halfway through the clip, something flickered. The image jumped like the feed glitched, and for one frame, I swear, there was a figure in the doorway. Not a person exactly, just a tall, pale shape, motionless. No features I could make out. Then it was gone. The light dimmed, and the video ended. When I looked up, daylight was coming through the blinds. Everything was exactly where it should have been. Door locked, nothing disturbed. I didn't go to work that day. I sat at the kitchen table replaying the clip over and over until my phone battery died. Each time, the shape looked a little different. Maybe because I wanted it to. But there's something undeniably there. A faint outline. That night, I slept on the couch with all the lights on. I left my phone on the coffee table, screen facing me. No new recordings. The next night, same thing, nothing. The third night, I finally turned the lights off. Still nothing. Eventually, I moved the phone back to my nightstand and started pretending it had been some bizarre glitch, maybe a corrupted file or a reflection from outside. But deep down, I knew none of that fit. 2 months later, I was deleting old photos to free up storage when I found the two clips again. I hadn't watched them since that week. I figured I'd finally delete them and stop thinking about it. When I tapped the first one, though, it didn't play. The screen stayed black, then froze. The audio still worked, faint rustling, the hum, that strange pulse of light, but the image never loaded. I tried the second one, same thing. Black screen, sound intact. And that's when I noticed the timestamps. They weren't both from 241 or 242 like before. The first video now said 2:43:12. The second said 40:42. Exactly 30 seconds apart. I checked the metadata, and all of it had changed. Dates, times, even the file size. Like they'd been resaved or rewritten somehow. But I hadn't touched them since the night they were made. Now, whenever I charge my phone overnight, I leave it in the kitchen, face down. I haven't found any new recordings since then, but every once in a while, I'll wake up around that same time, 2:40 something, for no reason at all. And sometimes, just before I fall back asleep, I could swear I hear that faint hum again. I was walking home from my friend's place on a Sunday night, a little after midnight. It's about a 15-minute walk from his house to mine, all quiet back roads through a rural stretch outside of Ashland, Oregon. The kind of area where you might see a car every 10 minutes and the loudest thing you hear is your own footsteps on gravel. It had rained earlier that evening, so the air was cool and smelled like wet pine. The pavement still shone a bit under the streetlights, though once I turned off the main road, it got dark fast. I didn't mind. I've walked that route hundreds of times. I remember checking my phone around 12:11. No service, which isn't unusual in that area. I was about halfway home, right by the bend where the road curves past a clearing and dips downhill. That's when I saw it. A light, hovering in the trees off to my right. At first, I thought it was maybe someone's ATV or a dirt bike headlight, but it wasn't moving, and there was no sound at all. It just hung there between the branches, not high up, maybe 10 or 15 feet off the ground, perfectly still. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a car beam, more like a warm white orb, soft around the edges with no glare or flicker. It didn't light up the trees around it the way it should have, which I noticed right away. The branches nearest to it were just normal, like the light wasn't touching them. I stopped walking. There's no house on that side of the road for about half a mile, just woods and a small creek. The first thing I did was listen. If it was a drone, I'd have heard the rotors. If it was a lantern or reflection, there should have been some movement, but it just stayed there, motionless, dead silent. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring. Then the light dimmed, not suddenly, but like someone was slowly turning down a dial. And then it was gone. I stayed frozen for a moment, waiting for it to come back, but nothing did. I don't know why, but the moment it disappeared, every sound around me dropped away. Even the crickets went quiet. I finally took a few steps off the road toward the trees. I couldn't see anything. No light, no movement, just wet pine needles and blackness between the trunks. When I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight, I realized my screen wouldn't turn on. The phone itself worked. I could feel the vibration when I hit the button, but the display stayed black. That made me stop. I stood there another minute, holding my useless phone, trying to make sense of it. I was starting to feel stupid just standing by the road, so I figured I'd go home and check it out the next day. About 100 feet farther down the road, I heard a single sound behind me, like a faint crack of a branch underfoot. Not loud, but clear. I turned and looked back, expecting to see maybe a deer, but the trees were still. My heart was pounding by then, though I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. When I finally got home, my phone screen came back to life. I didn't even have to restart it, it just turned on when I set it down on the counter. I checked the time, 12:29. The walk usually takes 15 minutes, so that added up, but for some reason I felt like I'd been out longer than that. The next morning, I went back to the spot. It was bright and clear out, no fog, no rain. I parked my truck near the bend and walked into the trees where I'd seen the light. The ground was damp and soft, but maybe 20 feet in, I found a patch of grass that looked different from the rest. It was perfectly circular, maybe 6 feet across, and completely brown. The blades were curled, dry, and brittle, even though the surrounding grass was still damp from the rain. The edges of the circle were too sharp to be from an animal or a fire pit. I crouched and ran my fingers over it. It felt warm. Not hot, but warmer than the air. I stood there for a long time trying to reason it out. I thought maybe someone had built a small fire, but there was no ash, no stones, no footprints, just a flawless, even circle of scorched grass in the middle of damp earth. When I got back home, I couldn't shake it. I didn't mention it to anyone right away, it just felt weird to explain. But that night, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back again, parked in the same spot, and killed my headlights. It was a clear night. The moon was out, pale and thin, and everything was quiet. I sat there with the engine off, window cracked, waiting. Around 12:20, I saw something through the trees. Not the same light as before. This one was smaller, like a flashlight beam moving slowly across the ground. I thought maybe someone else had found the clearing and was poking around, but there were no footsteps, no voices. Just that faint glow weaving between the trunks. I stepped out of the truck and stood by the road, watching. The beam stopped suddenly, as if whoever held it turned it off. Then the woods went dark again. That same second, every hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't fear exactly, more like static in the air. My ears felt pressurized, like they popped on a plane, and the silence got so heavy it was almost a sound by itself. I started backing up toward the truck. Before I got in, I looked one last time at the clearing. The small light was gone, but another one had appeared higher up, in almost the exact same spot I'd seen the first one the night before, hovering. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before it blinked out. I got in the truck and drove straight home. For the next few nights, I couldn't stop checking the tree line from my porch. Sometimes I'd think I saw faint movement or flickers in the distance, but nothing clear. I didn't go back out there again until the weekend. By then, the circle of scorched grass was still there, but it had changed slightly. The middle looked darker, like it had burned deeper into the soil. The edges were still perfectly defined. I took a picture of it that time, but for some reason, the image on my phone looked off. It showed a faint haze over the patch, like heat distortion, even though the air felt cool. When I tried to show it to my friend the next day, the picture was gone, just a blank gray square in my gallery. The following night, around 12:30, I was sitting in my living room when my dog, Murphy, started growling at the back door. I thought maybe he heard a raccoon, but when I went to check, the motion light over the yard was on. I looked out through the glass, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw the same kind of glow at the edge of the woods behind my house. It disappeared almost immediately, but the motion light stayed on for several minutes. Murphy wouldn't stop pacing. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I walked out back just to make sure everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place. No footprints, no lights, no sign of anything at all. But when I looked down near the tree line, I noticed another patch of grass, smaller this time, maybe 2 feet wide, but the same perfect circle, same scorched look. I stood there for a while staring at it, then went back inside. I haven't checked again since. Every now and then, though, when I take Murphy out before bed, I'll see a faint white flicker somewhere in the woods. It never lasts long enough for me to be sure it's not just my eyes adjusting to the dark. But I always end up looking at the same spot, right where that first circle was. Right? I drove out to Lake Hartwell that Friday evening, later than I'd planned. The sun was just dipping below the pines, and there was that cold bite in the air that comes with early November. I'd been cooped up all week at my desk job in Greenville, and I just wanted a quiet night by the water to clear my head. I parked near the public boat ramp. It was deserted, except for a couple of fishing boats tied up at the far end. The wind was calm, the surface of the lake glassy. I grabbed my jacket, my thermos, and a folding chair from the trunk, and walked down the short path to the shore. The water lapped softly at the stones, nothing unusual. I set up my chair near the edge, rested my thermos in the sand, and sat down, just staring out across the lake. The air smelled like wet leaves and pine, and I could hear an occasional twig snap somewhere behind me in the woods. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. Tiny ripples forming in the water, like someone had thrown small stones, but there wasn't a wind stirring, and I didn't see any fish jumping. I froze, looking around. Nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing moving. The ripples just kept appearing in irregular patterns, spreading out across the surface in no rhythm I could understand. I got up, curious, and walked closer to the water, squinting along the surface. That's when I saw it, a faint light, dim, greenish-white, gliding just above the water. It moved slowly, almost lazily, but it wasn't floating on the surface. It hovered maybe a foot above the lake. I swore I caught a shimmer in the air around it, like heat waves off a sidewalk in July. But the air was cold, crisp. My first thought was someone messing with a flashlight on a boat somewhere, but the lake was empty. I squatted near the edge, trying to see where it came from. The light seemed aware of me. It slowed when I leaned in, then drifted away as if keeping its distance. I fumbled for my phone to film it, but when I opened the camera, all I got was static. The screen flickered, the greenish-white glow just a blur, no shape, no detail. I muttered to myself, okay, that's weird, and tried to walk toward it. The light didn't speed up or panic, it just moved gently away from me. I kept my feet in the shallow water, careful not to splash. The ripples were still forming behind it, as though the lake itself was reacting to its presence. I stopped when I realized I couldn't hear anything beyond the faint slap of water against the shore. No frogs, no birds, no wind. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until every small sound feels amplified. I thought about calling someone, but the nearest house was half a mile away, and I didn't even know if I had a signal here. The light glided closer to a small cove, moving around a patch of reeds. I followed slowly, keeping the phone raised, light, and the static only intensified when I pointed the camera. The glow seemed more concentrated now, a soft, steady pulse that wasn't quite like a flashlight or lantern. My stomach started knotting, like the feeling when you drive over a bridge too high and the car shakes under you. I got within maybe 20 feet of the cove, and then it happened. The light blinked out, just vanished. The lake surface went smooth, the ripples disappeared, and the reeds swayed only in the faintest current. I stood there, half crouched, scanning the area. Nothing. No trail, no reflection, no sound. The water looked completely normal, like nothing had ever been there. I backed away slowly, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the twilight. But then I noticed the path I'd walked. My footprints in the sand were intact, but they seemed wrong, like they hadn't really pressed into the ground. I crouched and touched one with my hand. It was just sand, but somehow it didn't feel like it should be. I left the lake quickly after that, heart thumping. My thermos and chair were abandoned in the sand, forgotten in the rush to get back to the car. I didn't look back, and I didn't hear anything following me. No sound at all except my shoes on the gravel path. The moment I reached the car and started the engine, I felt a strange relief, almost like the lake and the air itself had released me. Driving home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was empty, the trees shadowed but normal. I thought about calling someone to talk about it, but how do you explain a faint, hovering light that leaves ripples on a glassy lake and disappears when you get close? I didn't. I just drove, gripping the wheel a little too tightly. Later that night, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a lantern floating in the wind, but the lake was perfectly still. Maybe some phosphorescent algae, but I've fished here enough to know the water doesn't glow like that. Maybe a hallucination? I didn't feel tired or stressed that day, nothing to trigger anything like that. I checked my camera again. Nothing recorded. My phone had plenty of storage, battery full, normal operation, just static where the light had been. It's been weeks now, and I still think about it. Every time I drive past Lake Hartwell, I slow down a little, stare at the water. Most nights it looks normal, but sometimes when the air is still and the lake mirrors the sky perfectly, I swear I see the faintest ripple out of nowhere moving across the water, and I feel that pull again, like the lake wants me to look closer. I don't go down to that cove anymore. I don't film it or try to follow it, but I keep thinking about those ripples. The light hovering just above the surface, the static on my phone. Whatever it wasn't natural. And even now, I don't know if I ever want to know. I woke up that morning thinking it had rained. The air felt heavy, and the light coming through the blinds was soft and gray, the kind of light that usually means it's foggy outside. My wife, Erin, was still asleep, and the house was quiet. I got up, made coffee, and stepped out the back door like I always do on weekends to let the dog out and check the garden. We live just outside of Bozeman, Montana, near the edge of town. Our backyard backs up to a field that slopes down into some trees. It's quiet out here. No streetlights, no traffic noise. The kind of place where you notice if something's off because there's so little happening most of the time. That morning, the air was totally still. No wind, no birds. Even the dog, Penny, hesitated at the door for a second before going out. She sniffed the air, looked around, then trotted down the steps. I took a sip of coffee and looked out toward the garden, and for a second I couldn't tell what I was seeing. The rows didn't look right. We have 6 raised beds, 2 with vegetables, 1 with herbs, and the rest with flowers and random stuff Erin likes to grow. But the layout was different. I couldn't figure out how at first. I actually thought I was just seeing it from a weird angle or that my eyes were still adjusting. Then I realized the soil had been raked. Perfectly flat. Every bed. The tomato cages and the little garden stakes were still there, but they were all lined up differently, exactly parallel, like someone had used a laser to measure them. The marigolds, which had been scattered, were now planted in precise circles. The herbs were grouped into triangles. And in the middle of the garden, where there had just been dirt the day before, the soil had been arranged into a pattern. It wasn't like a crop circle or anything. It was smaller, maybe 10 feet across, but it looked deliberate. Concentric shapes pressed lightly into the dirt, like someone had drawn with the back of a rake. Not deep, just enough to catch the light. I remember thinking it looked like geometry homework. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and walked out barefoot. The ground was damp but not muddy, and there were no footprints. None at all. Not mine, not Penny's, not whoever would have done this. The soil was smooth except for the pattern. I called for Erin, but she didn't answer. She's a heavier sleeper than I am, and I didn't really want to sound alarmed, so I just stood there staring. Penny had stopped near the edge of the garden and was standing completely still. Her ears were up and her head was tilted like she was listening to something. That was the first moment I noticed how quiet it was. Normally in the morning you hear the highway in the distance or at least some birds, but there was nothing. It was so still that when I set my coffee mug down on the porch rail, I could hear the ceramic click echo faintly. Erin came out a few minutes later in her robe, rubbing her eyes. I didn't say anything, just pointed. She looked at it for a long time, then said, "When did you do that?" "I didn't," I told her. We went back and forth like that for a bit. She thought I was messing with her. Then she started to realize I was serious. She went inside to grab her phone to take pictures, but when she came back out, her camera wouldn't focus right. The screen kept adjusting the exposure on its own, like it couldn't figure out what to make of the light. She eventually got a few shots, but they came out washed out and blurry, even though everything looked perfectly clear to the naked eye. We spent half the morning trying to think of a rational explanation. Maybe someone came through the gate during the night. But the gate was latched from the inside and there were no marks in the dirt. No tire tracks on the grass either. Around 11, Erin went inside to call her dad, who's big into gardening, to ask if he'd ever heard of soil patterns forming naturally or from insects or something. While she was talking, I stayed out there, pacing around the garden, trying to retrace what it looked like before. That's when I noticed something else. The pattern wasn't random geometry. It had symmetry, like something mirrored on both sides. The outermost ring wasn't quite circular. It was slightly oval, stretching toward the back fence. And when I followed that direction with my eyes, I realized something in the field behind our house looked different too. The grass out there was shorter. Not flattened, just trimmed somehow, like it had been precisely cut into a rectangle maybe 20 feet wide. I walked over to the fence and leaned against it. There was no smell, no burn marks, nothing unusual except that the grass was noticeably shorter, perfectly even. I called Penny, but she didn't come. When I turned around, she was sitting in the exact middle of the garden, right on the geometric pattern, just sitting there, completely still, staring at me. I called her again, louder, and she didn't move. I had to walk back and put a hand on her collar to get her to stand up. When I touched her, her fur felt warm, warmer than it should have been. That night, we both felt uneasy. Erin said she kept hearing faint humming outside, but I didn't hear anything. The dog wouldn't stop pacing. Around midnight, I went out with a flashlight to check the yard again. The air felt thick and dry, and the beam from my flashlight seemed weaker than usual. I don't know how else to describe it. It just didn't cut through the dark the same way. The pattern in the dirt looked different under the light. The shapes seemed deeper, like they'd been pressed in further since the morning. I got this weird feeling that I shouldn't step inside the lines, so I didn't. The next morning, it was gone. Completely. The soil looked untouched again, as if someone had smoothed it all out overnight. The plants were still in their strange new arrangement, but the pattern itself had disappeared. We showed the photos to a couple friends that weekend, but they all said it looked like glare or lens issues. Erin didn't like talking about it. She started keeping the blinds shut on the back windows at night. A week later, I woke up around 3 in the morning because Penny was whining by the door. I figured she needed to go out, so I got up, half asleep, and let her into the yard. When I looked through the window, she went straight to the middle of the garden and lay down in the same spot as before. The next morning, there was a faint circular mark in the dirt again, just one ring this time. And the grass behind the fence looked freshly cut again, the exact same shape as before. We didn't take more pictures. Erin said she didn't want to feed it, whatever that meant. I didn't argue. By the end of the month, the marks stopped appearing. The plants grew normally and everything looked fine, but the soil where that pattern had been, nothing grows there anymore. It's just bare dirt, no matter how much we till it or water it. We moved the following spring. Not because of that, officially, we just said we wanted to be closer to town, but I think we both knew it was the reason. Sometimes, when I wake up before sunrise, I still picture how the garden looked that morning. The perfect circles and triangles in the dirt, everything aligned just so, like something had measured it in the dark while we slept. I was halfway through the drive back from Palm Springs when I first noticed it. The sun had just gone, that brittle July dusk where the horizon still glows, but everything else is stepping into a different temperature. I'd left my sister's place later than I meant to, the AC finally giving up, and the car running on fumes of cold air and old crossover playlists. Highway 62 out past Joshua Tree was mostly empty. One strip of black asphalt cutting across flat scrub and low hills, the kind of road where your headlights are the only moving thing for miles. I wasn't looking for anything. I was thinking about work tomorrow, what I needed to pick up at the grocery store, whether my neighbor had fixed his fence like he said he would. Then, ahead and a little to my right, something bright caught the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a reflection off a truck window or some lit sign on the far ridge. Instead, it was a small, clean disk of light floating low over the scrub, the size of a street lamp, but with an even, solid white that didn't flicker. I blinked, slowed a little, and watched it. It seemed to be following the road in parallel, over the creosote, about the same distance from the pavement as my mirrors, keeping pace with me. I had that ordinary first reaction you get on late drives. Check mirrors, see if there's a car behind you, decide whether to speed up or slow down. Nothing behind me but the dark ribbon of road. The thing stayed where it was, just off to the right, like a second headlight without a car. I rationalized. Balloons, promotional drone for some late-night shoot, headlight reflection, the usual assortment your brain throws up when it doesn't want to be weirded out. The desert was baking still. Heat shimmer could play tricks. I told myself I was tired and eased off the gas another notch. The little light stayed the same distance, maybe half a mile away. When I rolled down the window, the air smelled like sun-warmed sage and dust. No hum, no drone buzz, nothing mechanical that you'd expect from a device that could hover. I killed the radio and let the engine's low purr be the only human sound. The light mirrored that silence. It didn't bob or correct the way a cheap drone might. It moved smoothly, almost lazily, sliding along the slope of the empty land. I impulsively took the next turnout, a gravel pull-off where a faded sign warned of rattlesnakes and asked drivers to conserve fuel. There was that odd, private gaze feeling you get when you slow down on the shoulder. Do you stop? Do you go? Do you call someone? I put the car in park and watched through the windshield. The light did exactly what I did. When my car rolled to a stop, the light stopped too, hovering in place like someone had hit pause on it. That's the moment my stomach tightened. Logic says the light shouldn't react to my brakes. It shouldn't care what I do. But it did. I took a breath and killed the engine. Complete quiet for a slice of desert that otherwise would have had crickets doing their somewhere off rhythm. The light remained motionless, maybe 100 yards away. I sat there for a minute, too aware of my own heartbeat. I tried the phone, texted my brother, short message, "You awake?" because it felt better to test whether my thumbs were steady than to do something more drastic. No answer. Signal bars were one unhappy line. I opened the camera and aimed it toward the light. The live view showed the plain dark of dusk with a smear of brightness where the light sat, nothing like the crisp, defined disk I saw with my eyes. I took one shaky photo. The image came out as a white blob, overexposed and strangely clean, like someone had painted a circle onto a black canvas. I told myself I should get back on the road, keep going home, call someone later, and make a joke of it. Instead, I watched. After maybe another minute or two, I put the car in gear and drove forward slowly, maybe 10 miles an hour. The light moved in perfect sync with the car. Whenever I rolled, it rolled. Whenever I eased off, it eased. When I sped up a little, it tucked in slightly behind my right rear quarter. I kept expecting to see a source, a figure, a vehicle, a tether to a hillside. Nothing. The plants in the wash went on being creosote and brittle branches. No shadow, no reflection, no heat bloom. At some point, a little red pickup came by the other way with an old-fashioned single headlight out and the driver squinting straight ahead. He didn't slow, didn't flash his lights, didn't even glance toward my side of the road. If anyone else saw it, they acted like it was an ordinary stretch of highway. That made me feel both relieved and more alone. I parked at the turnout closer to the ridge and stepped out. The desert air felt different close up, thin and sharp. The light hovered maybe 80 yards out now, still motionless. I walked a few steps toward it. As soon as I took those steps, it drifted away, not panicked, just a smooth, gradual motion, matching my direction. I stopped. It stopped. I walked a few more steps. It matched. It was the uncanny intimacy of something that was paying attention. My first, stubborn thought was, if I drive fast enough, I can lose it. So I slid back into the driver's seat and floored it, the throttle puckering the gravel under the wheels. The speedometer climbed, the desert blurring, and for a split second I thought I'd left the light behind. Then, as if riding an unseen current, It rose a few feet and paralleled me over the scrub, keeping an almost careful distance. It didn't follow directly above the car. It kept to the side, as if respecting my space while maintaining observation. Between the turns and the unpaved pull-offs, this went on for a while. Me trying different things, it mirroring in ways that made no sense. When I hit the long straightaway toward the ridge, I slowed to a crawl. The light slowed too, then ascended a few dozen feet, like it was easing into something else. It didn't move fast. It drifted up, becoming smaller and more dot-like against the first stars poking through the sky, until it blended into the faint, early night and finally went out of sight. No noise, no flash, no dramatic cinematic whoosh, just a thinning and then nothing. The car felt dramatically loud in that void. My knuckles had the imprints of the wheel burned into them. I laughed once, a short, hollow sound. The what the hell. Laugh you do when you aren't sure you want to be the one telling the story. I sat in the dark for a while longer, then started the engine and drove home slow, keeping the radio on this time, because silence felt too much like waiting. At a red light in a town I've driven through 100 times, my phone finally pinged. My brother, "You good?" Weird texts. I called him and told him about the light, trying to keep my voice steady. He asked where I was and said, "Probably an art installation or someone with a quadcopter." I tried to imagine someone launching an installation in the middle of a desert at night, but the memory of how the light mimicked my stops and starts didn't line up with that explanation. The conversation was the kind you have when you want reality to agree with you. Plausible alternatives, polite skepticism, the small talk that retakes the map of ordinary life. I got home around midnight and felt foolish going through the garage door like I'd been trying to sneak past the world. The house smelled like dish soap and lemon. My neighbor's porch light was on. A small dog barked and then was quiet. I told myself the incident would look smaller in the morning. Maybe I'd have photos. Maybe I'd find something that explained it, a drone imprint, a trail of something, tire tracks in the shoulder. But there was nothing. My camera had the overexposed white circle. The video I took was static streaked in the middle frames, like the lens couldn't properly parse whatever brightness it had seen. My notes were a blotch of saw light, followed me, rose and left, and an ugly feeling under the sternum. I did tell a couple people at work the next day. Some shrugged. One guy swore he'd been chased by a light on a highway near Reno years ago and told me I should avoid that stretch at night. My sister sent a string of concerned emojis and a single text that said, "Be careful." I appreciated that in a practical, adult way and filed it next to the report I made to myself. I am okay, car runs fine, house is locked. It's been weeks. I've driven that stretch again in daylight. The scrub looks as empty and indifferent as it did before. People, I tell, either laugh or change topics. The more I travel at night now, the more I watch the sky and the shoulders with a small, new attention. I can't say I'm afraid exactly, just aware in an old animal way that something noticed me and then decided it didn't need to be where I could point it out. When I think about it now, what unsettles me most is how polite it was. It didn't rush, didn't scream, didn't aim beams at me. It mirrored the simplest things. When I paused, it paused. When I drove, it followed. Then, after my last try to make it reveal something, it drifted up and melted into the night like a thought evaporating. I made it home. I slept. Life, predictably, demanded groceries and bills and a plant I forgot to water. The memory sits in the corner of those things, an adjustment you make to accommodate something that doesn't fit the usual map. I'd been driving all day, winding through the Blue Ridge Mountains, aiming for a cabin my friend rented for the weekend. I wasn't in any hurry, just enjoying the late afternoon sun filtering through the trees. The air was crisp for early October, cool enough that my windows were cracked open, letting in that pine smell that always makes me feel like I'm on vacation, even when I'm only a few hours from home. Around 5:30, I was on one of those narrow, twisting roads where you can't really see beyond the next curve. A few miles back, I'd passed a small herd of deer grazing near the edge of a clearing. Everything seemed normal. Birds were fluttering, squirrels scampered up the trunks. I had the radio on low, nothing special, just some soft rock. Then, just past a blind turn, it hit me. The world seemed Still, not quiet, exactly, but frozen in a way that didn't feel right. A flock of birds that had been chasing each other suddenly stopped mid-flight. The squirrels that had been darting around were perched in place, staring into the distance. Even the wind felt like it had paused for a second. I slammed on the brakes, heart thumping. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was some kind of weird optical illusion. But then I saw the valley ahead. Normally, this stretch opens up to a wide view of the mountains falling away into layers of forest and river. The sunlight hit the ridge in a dappled pattern. But now, the valley glowed. It wasn't like sunlight or fog. It was a pale, diffuse light that seemed to hover over the trees, not coming from the sky. I couldn't tell the color exactly. It was somewhere between white and green, faint but steady. It looked like it had a texture, almost like light was leaking over a surface rather than shining on it. I rubbed my eyes again and blinked, but the glow stayed. And then, slowly, without warning, it dimmed. Not gradually like the sun setting, but like someone had drawn a curtain across it in an instant. The valley went from faintly luminous to a flat, unnatural darkness that didn't match the shadows of the trees around me. Everything around me was still lit normally by the late afternoon sun, just that valley. Black. I turned off the radio. The sudden silence made it worse, the kind of empty quiet that presses against your ears. My hands gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. The animals were still frozen, even the birds hadn't moved. It felt like the entire world had paused around me. I considered turning around, going back the way I came, but instinctively I kept driving. The road was narrow, the shoulder non-existent. My headlights swept over the asphalt, over the trees lining the cliffside, but the valley below stayed pitch dark. I kept expecting something to move. A branch to snap, a deer to bolt, a bird to take off, but nothing, just this oppressive stillness. Then I saw it. A figure, or maybe two, on the edge of the ridge below. I'm not proud of it, but I froze, just staring. They were small, almost humanoid, but off. They didn't move like humans. No sway, no weight shift, just straight and vertical, standing as if the valley itself had planted them there. They were facing me, though I couldn't make out a face. I blinked. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. Nothing, just the black valley. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of light, shadows playing in the trees, but the stillness, the animals, the frozen air, the unnatural darkness, made it hard to shake the feeling that I was being watched. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from my friend, "Where are you?" I glanced down. I'd been driving for maybe 5 minutes, but my watch said it was 4:17, not 5:35 like it had been. I stared at the time, then at the valley. Something about the light, the way it glowed, the way it had disappeared, made my stomach knot. I drove on slowly, eyes darting from shoulder to shoulder, listening for anything. The hum of the engine felt impossibly loud, and for the first time I realized how quiet the world had become. The further I drove, the normal things started happening again. A bird flapped, startled by my passing. A squirrel jumped down the trunk it had been frozen on. The deer blinked and moved as if waking from a long dream. The air shifted. The wind picked up again. The valley behind me stayed shadowed for a moment longer, then gradually caught sunlight again, normal shadows falling across the trees. I didn't look back for more than a second. When I finally reached the cabin, my hands were shaking. I checked the animals in the nearby yard. Everything moved normally. My friend Jake was sitting on the porch with a beer. He waved. "You good? Took you a while." I nodded, muttered something about the road, and went inside. The rest of the weekend was quiet, normal. Hiking, we cooked dinner, told stupid stories, played cards. But the memory of that valley, the stillness, the light, the darkness, figure, stayed with me. I've driven that stretch of road plenty of times since, during the day and night. Never seen anything like it again. Sometimes I'll tell myself I imagined it, that the combination of late afternoon light, fatigue, and mountain shadows tricked me. But my phone's timestamp still nags me. And every time I close my eyes, I can see that valley glowing faintly, then vanishing as if it never existed at all. I still don't know what I saw, and I doubt I ever will. But I do know that part of me doesn't want to drive that road again, especially when the animals are out and the light starts to fade. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand, and, for a fraction of a second, thought it was my alarm. My hand groped at the dark, hit the soft case, silenced the buzz, and then everything settled back into the quiet of the house. The clock read 3:07 a.m. The dog, Nico, who sleeps at the foot of the bed when he's feeling brave, had his head on my ankle and didn't stir, which I took as a good sign. The good sign lasted until I pushed the covers back and padded to the bathroom. The hallway light was off. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the diffuser Aaron keeps on the counter, but stronger. There was a metallic edge in the air I couldn't place. What stopped me in the doorway was the bathroom mirror. Every mirror in the bathroom was fogged from the inside. I mean, the glass looked like somebody had breathed directly onto the inside of it. That soft, cloudy film you get after a hot shower, only there had been no shower. The rest of the room was cold, no steam on the bulbs, the tile under my feet wasn't warm, and the shower had been untouched. I reached out and touched the outside of the glass. It was cool and dry like the rest of the room. My fingertips left no smear. For a moment, I just stood there because the obvious explanations didn't add up in any order that made sense. The furnace had not kicked on, the humidifier wasn't running, and all the windows were closed. I rubbed my eyes and told myself I was half asleep, that I needed coffee and should go back to bed. Then a shape moved across the mirror. It was not a face, exactly, just a darker, slightly clearer silhouette slipping along the inside surface. It traced the top edge, moved in a lazy arc across the center, and stopped near the sink, as if considering the faucets. I watched it like a person watching someone else in a friend's house, curious and wary at once. When I blinked, it vanished. Not faded, not turned off, gone, like I had cleared the glass with my own eyelids. I checked the other mirror on the linen cupboard, fogged from the inside. I peered through the haze and saw the outline of the hallway reflected dimly. There were the stairs, the banister, the glow of the street lamp through the curtains in the living room. I turned away and came back. A tiny crescent of the fog had retreated, as if the mirror itself had shivered. Nico, who had followed me down the hall, pressed his shoulders against my knees and gave a single low whine. I went room to room after that, as if checking doors in a bad dream would make the situation more rational. The bedroom mirror, same thing. The full length on the closet door, fogged on the inside. Even the little medicine cabinet mirror in the downstairs powder room, which is rarely used, had the same inside fog film. Every glass surface that usually reflected me in the house carried that same odd interior haze. The windows were clear as glass, the kitchen sink was dry, and there was no steam anywhere. It made no scientific sense in the way that matters most. Things are only supposed to do this if there's hot water, humidity, or someone breathing on them. None of that was happening. I tried to record the bathroom with my phone. The camera showed the hazy mirror, but without the shape I had seen. The live view picked up a gray smear and then static, like a bad reception. I filmed for 30 seconds and played it back 3 times. The sound was normal, the little mechanical hum of the fridge and the creak of the house settling, but the file wouldn't show the silhouette. My phone battery also reads 72% despite being on the charger overnight. That made my chest tighten because I plug the phone in and rarely look at it otherwise. When I dug the charger out of the outlet, the bedside lamp flickered and went dark for half a second, then back to normal. A power hiccup. Coincidentally, everything that could be explained away, I told myself, should be. But the fog didn't make sense. Nico paced once and then lay down with his head on my slipper. He's an old dog, skeptical of excitement. His ears were on me, alert like a kid who's sure a story is coming. I made coffee even though it was early, just for the motion of it. While the kettle heated, I watched my reflection in the microwave door. The glass was clear, only the mirrors, not the tinted surfaces, not any reflective metal, only the mirrors. When Erin woke up around 6, I told her, starting with the practical stuff. All the mirrors are fogged, and then sliding into dumbfounded. She listened the way someone listens to an odd weather report, eyes concerned but not surprised in that casual, married sort of way. Erin suggested a burst of hot water. Maybe the neighbor was doing laundry? We both stood at the sink and turned every faucet in the house on for a minute, let the faucets rain, hoping warmth would clear it. When we checked, the fog remained stubbornly on the inner surfaces. The faucets didn't even seem to faze it. On one mirror, our handprints appeared on the outside only, two smeared ovals from where we touched the cool glass. On the inside, nothing but those same soft clouds. That was the point where the house told us it wasn't an isolated quirk. The thermostat started to read 62 when I swore I had it set to 68. The old wall clock in the hallway was off by exactly 3 minutes behind every other clock in the house. My email showed one unread message, but when I opened it, there was nothing in the inbox. Aaron's phone lost GPS signal for a sliver in time, even though every tower in our area showed normal activity on the outage map. The weirdness threaded itself through the silly little mechanical things we use to feel the world is coherent. We called our neighbor Marta across the street. At first, she thought we were making some kind of joke, like, "You guys hitting some new trend?" She came over in her robe with a flashlight. She brought her phone, because that's what people do now when something is wrong. Marta stayed maybe 10 minutes, checked a mirror, frowned, and then looked at us like she was trying to choose between calling someone official and not wanting to make a fuss. She left saying, "Keep an eye on it," which is the same as saying nothing at all. That afternoon, when I finally felt brave enough, I sat down and looked into one of the fogged mirrors for a long time. The haze had a faint motion to it now, like something breathing under glass. It moved around the edges as if searching. Once, in the corner of the bathroom mirror, the haze condensed into a darker shape that could have been the suggestion of shoulders. And then it was gone when I looked directly at it, not when I blinked this time, but when I dared to turn my head and look away for a second, like tracking an animal through trees, and then it slips behind a trunk. By evening, I had to leave. I had a meeting, and the idea of sitting under fluorescent light and pretending nothing was off felt unbearable. Before I went, I made sure to close all the blinds and cover the big bedroom mirror with a sheet. It was a childish gesture, but covering it made the house feel less exposed, like putting on armor. Driving to the meeting, I kept thinking through possibilities. Condensation from a humidifier on the inside of the glass? Could a slow leak in a window cause it? Could some chemical be reacting on the mirrors? I even tried imaging the very unlikely and allowed my thoughts to dip into metaphors, reflections misbehaving like a trick mirror in a carnival. But they were metaphors, nothing more useful than that. I came back at midnight. The house smelled the same faint, metallic scent, as if something electronic had been dragged and tested. The front light was off, the street was quiet. I peeled the sheet off the bedroom mirror with a bit of theatrical courage and stood there with the dog padding at my feet. The glass was clear. Not completely, there was a faint line around the edge, like a memory of fog, but otherwise normal. The hallway clock read the right time. The thermostat showed 68. My phone read 100% battery. The house hummed like something that had put away an unexpected instrument and decided to let the world think everything had been normal all along. I wiped the bathroom mirror out of habit and found under the cloth a thin crescent smudged on the inside side surface. Not a finger, not a reflection. Just a faint arc that caught the light differently when I tilted my head. I took a picture of it with my phone. The photo came out gray and flat. When I zoomed in later, it was just pixels. I didn't sleep well. I left the bedroom mirror covered for a week after that, and every time I passed it, I felt the same little prickle. Curiosity mixed with the animal sense you get when someone has been in your house and you haven't noticed. We put a small camera out in the hall for a few nights, motion sensor cheap thing from Amazon, but the footage showed only empty rooms and the dog padding through in the middle of the night, sniffing at nothing and then moving on. No shape, no fog, no one breathing on the inside of the glass. I don't have an answer. The house went back to ordinary in many ways. Clocks accurate, phones charged, the thermostat obedient. And yet once in a while, when the weather turns and the house takes on that particular hush, I'll catch the faint metallic tang at the back of my throat and look at the mirrors differently. If I pass one at 3 in the morning, I'll run a hand over the outside of the glass just to make sure it's cool. Sometimes, when I'm brushing my teeth, I watch the inside of the mirror the way you watch the road at dusk, expecting something small and inexplicable to appear, and then, if I blink too long, disappear again. I went out for my usual night run around 11. The streets in my neighborhood, outskirts of Asheville, were mostly empty, and the air had that sharp pre-winter chill. I like running late. The quiet lets me think, or at least I tell myself that. I had my headlamp clipped to my jacket, shoes laced tight, playlist running softly in my ears. I took the short trail through the park behind my apartment complex. There's a small creek that runs along one side and a row of pines lining the edge. The path was slick from earlier rain, and the street lamps cast pools of orange light on the asphalt. I was about halfway through when I noticed something odd, but at first I ignored it. My shadow. It moved wrong. I slowed, glancing down instinctively. I was running past one of the brighter lights, and my shadow stretched long across the path. But for a moment, it wasn't in sync. My arm swung forward, and the shadow's arm lagged just slightly behind, flicking back like it had a mind of its own. My legs kicked up, and the shadow's legs hesitated, stretching in a way that didn't match my motion. I stopped completely, chest heaving, staring at it. The street lamp lit the trail evenly, nothing hiding behind me, and just like that, it snapped back into place, mirroring me exactly. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe it was a trick of the wet asphalt reflecting the light, but the ground was dry under that lamp. I tried to shake it off and kept running, though my pace was slower now. The trees rustled, wind picking up slightly. I chalked it up to stress or maybe staring too long at the shadows my headlamp cast. But every now and then, when I passed another pool of light, it would happen again, just a fraction of a second, enough for me to see my shadow lag behind me, or stretch a step forward before I moved. I stopped again near the creek, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath and my composure. That's when I heard it. A faint snapping sound, like twigs breaking under a heavy foot, but not on the path, off in the woods over by the tree line. I froze, looking toward the dark shapes of the pines. Nothing moved, no silhouette, no glow from a phone or flashlight, just the occasional rustle of leaves, but the snapping repeated, slow and deliberate. I turned back to the path. My shadow was normal again, perfectly aligned, but I couldn't stop checking. My pulse was spiking, chest tight, and I felt that odd, irrational need to leave, like something was watching, timing me. I started jogging again, trying to convince myself I was imagining everything. As I ran, I noticed other little things. The air smelled slightly metallic, not like wet iron from the creek, but something sharper. My headlamp caught glimpses of movement in the periphery of the trail, shadows that didn't line up with the trees, shapes that weren't there a second ago. Every time I turned my head, nothing, just the normal, empty park. A mile or so further, I reached a clearing near the old soccer fields. The lampposts there were older, bulbs flickering faintly. I slowed, watching the long shadows of the goalposts stretch across the grass. And then I saw it again, my shadow, lagging a fraction behind me when I stepped forward, leaning slightly in a direction I hadn't moved. It's hard to describe, but it was just enough to be unmistakable. My own movements reflected, but not perfectly, like a slight delay, like it was calculating what I was about to do. I stopped completely this time. My heart was pounding. I wanted to call someone, text my roommate, but the reception here was patchy, and I had no desire to explain what looked like an elaborate joke or my own imagination. I considered running back to the streetlights along the main road, but something in me, an odd mix of dread and curiosity, kept me in place. I backed up a few steps, keeping my gaze locked on the shadow. It stayed wrong for a few seconds longer, then settled. Exactly normal again. That's when I noticed the small things. The leaves on the field were all pointing in the same direction, but there was no wind. The grass seemed flattened in tiny, precise lines, radiating outward from a point near the center of the field. My stomach churned. I didn't touch it, didn't step closer. I made my way back onto the trail, running faster than before. I kept looking behind me, trying to see if anything followed. Nothing. The snapping had stopped. No shapes, no lights, no shadows out of place. Just me, the faint hum of the city in the distance, the rustling of leaves. By the time I reached the apartments, I was out of breath, drenched in sweat despite the cold. I bolted into my apartment, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breathing and think. The shadows in my apartment were normal. My lights worked like they always did. I checked my phone. Messages fine. Camera worked. Nothing. Nothing to record what had just happened. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my shadow lagging, moving independently just a little, my body reflected, but not quite. I wondered if it had been stress, some trick of light and fatigue, but the feeling of being observed, timed, measured, stuck with me. The next night, I ran the same path again. Nothing happened. Normal shadows, normal trees, normal air. I told myself it was over, a one-time thing. But even now, months later, I notice odd delays and shadows around streetlights, in my peripheral vision. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I don't know if what I saw was something beyond explanation or just a misalignment in how I perceived motion and light. But I know what I felt, watched, measured, like my own reflection wasn't mine. And I know I'll never run that path at night without glancing twice at the shadows, wondering which one really belongs to me.